The first sound of the day was not birdsong, for in this ancient world there were no farms, no roosters crowing at dawn, and no bells to mark the time. Instead, the morning began with silence, a silence so heavy it seemed to press against the skin. A caveman stirred inside the mouth of a shallow cave, his body curled against the chill of the night air. The floor beneath him was cold stone, littered with fragments of leaves and animal skins that offered only the faintest comfort. He shifted slowly, opening eyes unused to brightness, and for a moment he simply listened. The world beyond his cave was alive, though not in ways comforting to the modern ear. Distant howls faded into the background. The rustle of branches hinted at creatures searching for food, and the faint gurgle of a river carried through the air, steady and eternal. To awaken in the Stone Age was not to rise refreshed, but to be thrown once again into the endless contest between survival and death. The man stretched, his muscles stiff from the unforgiving floor. Every joint carried the memory of yesterday's labor, running after game, carrying stones, hauling wood. Unlike a modern body, cushioned by beds and warmed by fire at will, his frame bore the marks of struggle. Scars patterned his arms, scratches marred his skin, and his hair hung in matted strands across his shoulders. Yet when he moved, there was strength, the raw, practical strength forged not in exercise, but in necessity. He reached for a stick lying beside him, simple branch sharpened to a point, blackened by the embers of last night's fire. It was his weapon, his tool, his insurance against whatever might wait in the light outside. Without it, he would be only flesh and bone, prey to the teeth and claws that ruled the darkness. Slowly, he rose and stepped toward the mouth of the cave. The air outside was cold, biting his skin, filling his lungs with the sharpness of dawn. Mist clung to the trees, and the faint light of the rising sun bled through the branches in soft gold and gray. This was no peaceful sunrise, was the call to vigilance, for daylight meant movement, and movement meant risk. He crouched, scanning the clearing below. The forest stretched endlessly, a labyrinth of trunks and shadows. Somewhere within it prowled wolves, bears, and cats, larger than any seen today. Hunger sharpened their senses, just as it did his. He and they were bound by the same law: eat or be eaten. His tribe stirred behind him, though tribe was a small word for such a fragile group. Half a dozen figures moved slowly in the shadows of the cave women, children, another man. They, too, began their day with silence, conserving energy, avoiding unnecessary sound. Words, when spoken, were few and heavy with meaning. A grunt here, a gesture there, enough to convey intention. The youngest child whimpered, and his mother pressed her close, soothing with touch rather than voice. The caveman glanced back, his eyes lingering on them. They were his reason to rise, his burden as much as his strength. Alone, he might have lived longer. But life without tribe was no life at all. He stepped into the clearing, feet pressing into damp earth. The grass was wet with dew, chilling his toes, but he did not falter. His eyes scanned for signs of danger: broken branches, paw prints, the shifting of shadows. Each detail mattered. A single mistake could cost him his life. He sniffed the air, catching the faint tang of smoke left over from the fire they had built the night before. Smoke was safety, but it was fleeting. The fire had died, and with it, their shield against predators. He knew they must build it again soon, or the night would claim them. But first, the day demanded food. The forest beckoned, and with it came the weight of uncertainty. Would they find berries, roots, or a rabbit unlucky enough to cross their path? Or would the day bring only empty bellies and greater weakness? Hunger was not an occasional discomfort, it was a constant presence, gnawing at the belly, shaping every choice. He remembered times when days passed without meat, when even children learned to chew roots so bitter they burned the tongue. Yet hunger was also the fire that kept him moving, the reminder that life could not be delayed. As he moved deeper into the woods, his senses sharpened. The rustle of leaves overhead became the flapping of birds, fleeing from some unseen movement. The crack of a twig to his left quickened his heart, and his grip on the sharpened stick tightened. His eyes darted, searching for the source. A shadow moved, low and silent, but then vanished. He exhaled slowly, muscles coiled, body ready to fight or flee. This was not fear, as modern men know it, a distant worry or fleeting unease. This was survival fear, pure and electric, a force that kept him alive. The world around him was vast and untamed, yet it was also home. Every tree, every rock, every path. Here was the river where fish could sometimes be trapped. There was the hollow log where snakes curled in the heat of the day. Beyond that ridge lay a clearing where deer might gather at dusk. To live as a caveman was to carry a map, not in the mind, but in the body, etched into muscle and instinct. The land was not scenery, it was teacher, enemy, and companion. As the sun rose higher, the forest revealed itself in greater detail. Insects buzzed through the undergrowth, their wings catching the light like shards of glass. Birds cried overhead, swooping between branches, warning of larger creatures below. The caveman crouched to examine a track pressed into the mud three-toed clawed, fresh. His heart beat faster, for this was no prey. It was predator, close, perhaps too close. He backed away slowly, careful not to snap a twig, every motion calculated to keep his presence hidden. His survival was not bravery, but awareness. To live meant to watch, to listen, to sense danger before it struck. By midday, he returned to the cave, carrying little more than a handful of roots dug from the soil. It was not much, but it was something. The tribe gathered eagerly, dividing the food with quiet efficiency. Children chewed, their faces scrunching at the bitterness, but they swallowed, for hunger made even bitterness a gift. The women shared glances, wordless and weary, while the other man sat apart, sharpening a stone edge against another rock, sparks flying in tiny bursts of light. There was no celebration, no satisfaction, only the knowledge that they had survived another morning. As the day stretched on, the caveman rested against the stone wall of the cave, his body heavy with exhaustion. Yet, even in stillness, his mind never fully rested. His ears caught every sound, his eyes flicked to every shadow. The forest was alive, and it never stopped reminding him of the price of carelessness. Sleep would come later, when the fire returned, when darkness wrapped around them like a second skin. But even then, he would not dream of comfort. Dreams in this world were not of ease, but of survival. The next hunt, the next fire, the next dawn. To awaken in the Stone Age was to step once more into the endless struggle of existence. Each breath was borrowed, each moment a fragile gift. There was no promise of tomorrow, only the demand of today. And yet, within that harshness, there was a kind of clarity. Life was not clouded by luxury or distraction. It was simple, raw, and unyielding. To rise each morning was to declare, against all odds. Hunger gnawed at him like an invisible beast, its teeth sharper than any predator's fangs, its grip relentless as the new day rose. The ache in his stomach was not just his own, it belonged to the entire tribe, to the children who whimpered through the night, to the women who clutched their bellies in silence, to the men whose eyes grew dimmer with every passing dawn. To bring back food was not a mere duty. It was survival itself. The forest before him loomed vast, ancient, and indifferent, a place that gave nothing freely. With a spear clutched in his hand, its tip sharpened by careful strikes of stone, he stepped into the thicket where shadows curled like predators lying in wait. The ground was damp beneath his feet, the scent of wet earth heavy in the air, and the world seemed to whisper with unseen movements. He knew every sound mattered, the flutter of wings, the rustle of leaves, the faint crack of a twig. Here, silence was not peace. Silence was a test of patience, a war against his own body's hunger as he listened for life hidden within the trees. The first sign came as a faint track, pressed into the soil, a hoofprint, light yet fresh, carved by a deer that had passed only hours before. His heart leaped, for deer meant flesh, marrow, strength. He crouched low, fingers brushing against the impression, feeling the dampness of the earth, imagining the creature's weight, its direction, its urgency. Rising slowly, he followed the trail deeper into the woods, where trees closed in like towering guardians, their branches weaving a cage of green. Every step was measured, deliberate, as if he moved in rhythm with the breath of the earth itself. The forest spoke to those who could listen, birds calling from high branches, insects buzzing in restless waves, the distant snarl of something unseen. He tuned his body to this symphony, becoming not man but shadow, gliding through undergrowth that clung at his legs like grasping hands. Hours passed, though he did not count them. Hunger blurred the sense of time, making each step heavier, each breath sharper. His grip tightened on the spear until his knuckles whitened and sweat streaked his brow despite the coolness of the morning. Then, at last, the trail opened into a clearing, bathed in fractured light that filtered through the leaves. There, his prize waited. 3 deer grazed quietly, their heads bent, tails flicking against swarming flies. Their coats gleamed, their muscles rippled, and every movement seemed poised between elegance and escape. He froze, lowering himself into the tall grass, heart pounding like a war drum. The air grew taut, as though even the forest held its breath. He raised his spear slowly, the wood creaking faintly in his grip. The deer lifted their heads, ears twitching, nostrils flaring at the scent of danger. Time bent and stretched, each heartbeat a thunderclap, each breath a storm. Then, with a guttural cry that tore from his throat, he surged forward, muscles coiling with desperation. The spear left his hand, spinning, a blur of sharpened stone and intent. It struck true. One deer stumbled, legs collapsing beneath it, and let out a cry that shattered the clearing. The others bolted, vanishing into the forest like fleeting spirits. He rushed forward, seizing his weapon, ending the creature's suffering with swift, practiced force. Blood pooled across the grass, dark and steaming, filling the air with a metallic tang that mingled with soil and dew. For a long moment he knelt beside the fallen animal, chest heaving, sweat and relief mingling on his skin. His hand rested against the warm flank, not in reverence, but in recognition. Life had been traded for life. This was the unspoken covenant, the eternal bargain. His people would live because this creature had fallen. With stone blade in hand, he carved into the deer, peeling flesh from bone, slicing muscle into strips. Steady, despite exhaustion. The work was hard, but his focus never wavered. Each cut was purpose, each movement survival. The weight of meat grew heavy in his arms, but it was a weight he welcomed. Slipping the load over his shoulders, he rose again, the forest closing around him like a predator aware of blood. Now the danger was greater. Predators would smell the kill. Every rustle in the undergrowth, every snap of a branch carried threat. He quickened his pace, senses sharpened, eyes darting to shifting shadows. Once, he glimpsed yellow eyes watching from the brush, a low growl rumbling in the distance, but he pressed forward, spear ready, his body taut with the determination of one who carried not just his own life, but the life of his tribe. At last, after what seemed an eternity of cautious steps, the familiar dark mouth of the cave appeared. Relief flooded him as children rushed out to meet him, their cries sharp with joy, their tiny hands reaching greedily toward the promise of food. The tribe gathered quickly, the meat laid upon stones, smoke rising from hastily built fires as the first strips roasted, the fat crackling in flames. The scent filled the cave, rich and savory, and for once, eyes that had grown dim with despair glowed faintly with gratitude. Children chewed hungrily, grease smearing their faces, while women savored each bite with a reverence that only starvation could bring. Men tore into their portions silently, their strength returning with every mouthful. There was no celebration, no laughter, only the quiet, profound relief of survival. Tonight, the hunger would fade, if only for a while, as flames flickered against stone walls, painting shadows that danced like spirits. He sat apart, watching. He saw the light in their eyes, the way children leaned against mothers, the way even the weakest straightened their backs slightly. Yet he also saw the truth. The meal would be gone by morning, hunger would return, and once again he would have to walk into the forest to wrestle with death for the gift of life. The struggle was endless, the balance always fragile, but for this night, beneath the hum of fire and the whisper of wind beyond the cave mouth, there was peace. He closed his eyes, exhausted yet satisfied, knowing he had carried them all one step further through the endless storm of existence. Fire was not simply a flame to the caveman, it was a miracle, a weapon, a shield, and a sacred heartbeat that pulsed at the center of their fragile existence. Long before the tribe had tamed it, they had feared it, watching from the shadows as lightning struck the dry plains and set whole groves ablaze. The crackling infernos swallowing the land with a roar like the anger of the sky itself. But once they learned to coax spark from stone, to nurse a fragile ember into a dancing flame, everything changed. Fire meant warmth against the bone-deep cold of endless nights. Fire meant the banishment of shadows, where predators waited with gleaming eyes. Fire meant cooked meat that strengthened their bodies, smoke that preserved food, and the glowing heart of a gathering place where voices rose and fell like the wind through trees. They guarded it as though it were a living god, never letting it die. Even as men hunted and women foraged, one or two always stayed behind, feeding twigs, branches, and dried moss into its belly, whispering softly as if soothing a restless child. The shelter of caves and crude huts built from branches gave them walls, but it was fire that gave them courage to sit within those walls, daring to believe they were safe. At night, the world beyond their rocky shelters turned hostile, filled with sounds that stirred primal terror, the howl of wolves, the guttural cough of lions, the hiss of snakes sliding over stone. Yet inside the circle of firelight, the tribe found a fragile peace. Shadows danced along the cave walls, flickering shapes that seemed to tell stories of their own. Hunts retold in gesture, storms remembered in firelit pantomimes. Mothers pulled children close, their tiny eyes reflecting the flames, while elders spoke in hushed tones, weaving myths that gave shape to the unseen forces of nature. They believed the fire spoke back, crackling with approval, hissing in warning, and each spark that flew upward into the night was a message to the spirits above. Without fire, their shelters were just dark holes in the stone, prisons where cold and fear crept in like silent killers. With fire, those same shelters became sanctuaries, living hearts where warmth, safety, and hope gathered. The work of building shelter was no less vital. The caves that dotted the landscape were both blessing and curse, protection from storms, yet sometimes already claimed by bears, snakes, or rival tribes. Where no cave could be found, the people fashioned crude huts, layering branches into frames and covering them with hides scraped clean of fur and flesh. They learned to angle openings away from the wind, to weigh down the edges with stones, to line the ground with dry leaves and grasses for warmth. Every improvement came with scars earned through trial and era-collapsed roofs, smoke-choked interiors, shelters destroyed by storms. Yet each attempt taught them more about how to bend nature to their will. Children played in the corners of these makeshift homes, their laughter brief but precious, while adults huddled in circles, conserving body heat, sharing meat roasted over their ever-watchful flame. The shelters were crude, fragile against the weight of nature, but to the caveman they were fortresses, the thin barrier between themselves and the abyss outside in these shelters. The tribe learned more than survival. They learned connection. Firelight bound them together, encouraging trust in a world that had little mercy. Around it, they shared not only food, but stories, pain, joy, and silence that needed no words. In the glow of fire, they studied each other's faces, saw the same hunger, the same hope, and the same fear. They did not have the words for family as we know it, yet they lived it every night, bound by the fragile security of fire and stone. Fire gave them more than warmth, it gave them identity. It whispered to them that they were different from the beasts outside. It told them they belonged to something greater than instinct, that they could shape the world around them. The nights stretched long, predators prowling just beyond the circle of light, but still they endured. Sometimes they would hear claws scraping against stone, snarls echoing through the dark, eyes burning like coals at the edges of vision. The fire roared higher then, and the tribe pressed closer together, their hearts thundering with both terror and awe. They survived not because they were stronger than the beasts, but because they had harnessed something no beast could tame: the dance of fire, the embrace of shelter. And in that fragile union of flame and stone, man found his first true victory over the chaos of the world. Family, for the caveman, was not merely the blood that tied him to those who shared his face or form. It was the web of survival that bound every member of the tribe together. In the harshness of the Stone Age, one man alone could not endure the endless trials of hunger, predators, storms, and disease. It was only by leaning into the collective strength of many that existence was possible. The tribe was a living organism, every limb essential, every breath dependent on the others. Elders, bent with age and marked by scars, carried knowledge etched in memory: the location of waterholes, the signs of shifting weather, the healing roots hidden beneath soil. Women bore children and taught them the fragile skills of gathering fruits, cracking nuts, weaving hides for warmth. Men hunted, fought, and guarded. Children laughed, played, and, in their innocence, kept hope alive. Together, they moved through the cycles of dawn and dusk, their lives stitched tightly in a tapestry where no single thread could survive apart from the rest around the fire. Bonds deepened, cemented by rituals of sharing. When meat was scarce, the strongest often ate last, ensuring the young and weak endured first. Mothers nursed not only their own infants, but sometimes the children of others, when milk ran dry or sickness took its toll. Fathers, though they did not know the word, guided with grunts, gestures, and patience, teaching the young to napstone, to balance a spear, to listen for the breath of prey on the wind. Loss was common, grief woven into the rhythm of their lives, yet even in mourning, they leaned on each other. When a hunter did not return, his body claimed by beasts or nature, the tribe carried on together, every member aware that his absence weakened them all, but also deepened their resolve to endure. The caves became more than shelters, they became wombs of memory. Echoes of voices lingered in the stone chambers. Stories repeated, not for entertainment, but for survival, for identity. Children pointed to shadows flickering across the walls, imagining shapes of ancestors, watching, protecting, whispering warnings. To belong to the tribe was to inherit not just safety, but a sense of place in the eternal cycle of struggle and endurance. No one questioned loyalty. To turn away from the tribe was to embrace death. They were stronger together, and even in silence, they felt the invisible tether of unity. Yet, bonds were tested often. Jealousy festered when one hunter returned with more food than another, when a mother's child seemed healthier than the rest. Whispered suspicions arose. Had someone taken more than their share? Had someone failed to guard the fire properly, or hidden fruit in secret? These tensions sometimes boiled over into snarls, shoves, even blows. But violence within the group was short-lived, for the tribe could not afford division. After every quarrel came reconciliation, not out of love, but out of necessity. To fracture was to perish. Forgiveness, however grudging, was as essential as fire. Children were the glue of these bonds. Their laughter, shrill and bright, cut through the silence of hunger, reminding the tribe of why they fought to endure. Little ones played with pebbles, with scraps of hide, with bones smoothed by rivers. inventing games that unknowingly trained them for survival. They mimicked the gestures of hunters, the calls of animals. Even in their play, they prepared for the tasks awaiting them. Elders watched, eyes soft with memory, while parents guarded them fiercely, knowing the world outside offered no mercy. To lose a child was a wound deeper than hunger, a shadow that dimmed every fire. Death, when it came, was shared by all. If a member of the tribe fell, the body was not left for beasts without ritual. Stones were gathered, piled carefully, hiding the flesh from hungry eyes. Sometimes red ochre was smeared across the skin, a symbol of life's blood, of continuity. In hushed tones, elders would speak over the body, words not of farewell, but of recognition that this one had belonged, that this one had endured, that their struggle was not in vain. Even children learned to stand silently, heads bowed, as the fire crackled in somber agreement. In this way, grief became another thread, binding them together. Trust, though fragile, was everything. Each member depended on the others to keep watch through the night, to guard the fire, to share in the hunt. Betrayal was unthinkable, for betrayal meant death, not only of the betrayer, but of all. Still, the temptation lingered. Hunger could make men selfish, fear could make women secretive. Yet time and again, when tested, the tribe found ways to remain whole. They had no words for loyalty, no songs for brotherhood, but they lived these truths every day in the way they shared food, warmth, and silence. Thus, in the fragile circle of light, with children's laughter mingling with the low growls of predators outside, the cavemen discovered the first truth of humanity, that survival was not a solitary act. It was a collective triumph, born of shared blood, shared struggle, and shared hope. Their bonds, invisible yet unbreakable, were stronger than spears, stronger than walls of stone. They were the first families, the first tribes, the first sparks of community in a world that demanded unity to endure. Night, for the caveman, was not simply the absence of light. It was a living, breathing entity that pressed in from every direction, smothering, overwhelming, and endlessly watchful. As the sun slid beneath the jagged horizon, the forest grew restless, filled with sounds that the day kept hidden. Branches cracked where no wind stirred. Eyes glinted from thickets with an unnatural gleam, and the low growl of predators rolled across the air like distant thunder. The tribe huddled close together, fire their only guardian, its flames snapping defiantly against the endless black. Each flicker of light revealed pale faces streaked with ash, wide eyes darting into shadows, and hands clutching crude spears carved hastily from branches. They did not know words like safety or sanctuary, but they understood instinct, that once the darkness fell, the world belonged to beasts stronger, faster, and more merciless than themselves. The fear of night was primal, stitched into their very bones. Children whimpered and buried their faces into mothers' hides, while elders whispered warnings in hushed tones, old stories of hunters swallowed by shadows, of footsteps that followed when no one walked, of glowing eyes that watched from the tree line until breath itself froze in the chest. Even the bravest warriors, their muscles knotted and their spirits hardened by the hunt, felt their hands tremble when the fire burned low. In those long hours, the world seemed to contract into a tiny circle of orange glow. beyond which stretched an ocean of blackness, thick with unseen dangers. To fight the night, they clung to ritual. The tribe would feed the fire constantly, tossing in branches, bark, dried grass, anything that could be coaxed into flame. Sparks rose into the air like fleeting souls, vanishing quickly against the void above. Sometimes they painted ash on their faces, tracing patterns that elders claimed would confuse the spirits lurking outside the circle of light. Women sang low chants, their voices trembling but steady, each note meant to calm children and summon courage. Men sharpened spears obsessively, the rasp of stone against wood echoing like a heartbeat, a reminder that they were still alive, still fighting, still defiant, but not all dangers could be warded off. From the darkness came sounds that clawed at the mind, the scream of a panther, the howl of wolves that carried across valleys, the heavy crashing of something massive moving through the underbrush. Sometimes they glimpsed eyes reflecting firelight, hovering at the edge of vision, too many to count, too bold to ignore. In those moments, the tribe's breath caught as one, their silence thicker than the night itself. Spears were raised, voices hushed, and even the flames seemed to shrink. If the predators advanced, there was little they could do but pray the fire was enough, that the beasts would not risk the heat. Sleep came reluctantly, torn in shreds rather than whole. Mothers dozed in fits, jerking awake at every snap of a twig. Hunters slumped against the cave wall, but kept their hands wrapped around weapons. Children dreamed uneasy dreams, crying out from visions of teeth, claws, and endless running through dark forests where no dawn ever came. The elders, accustomed to fear, stared into the fire, their faces ghostly in the glow. They knew that night was the greatest enemy, not because of what it revealed, but because of what it hid. It was mystery itself, and in that mystery lay death. Yet the night was not only terror, it was also the crucible in which bonds of survival were forged. Around the fire, huddled close, the tribe felt unity more deeply than in daylight. Each face reflected in the flames reminded them that they were not alone. The fear of the darkness was shared, and in that shared fear lay the first sparks of community, of togetherness. A whispered story told by an elder about ancestors surviving worse nights brought comfort, a fragile reminder that others had endured before them. The children's tears, when dried by gentle hands, reminded the tribe why they must endure still. Even as shadows loomed, there was a tenderness in the closeness, a warmth that was not only from fire, but from each other. Still, the unknown gnawed at their thoughts. What was beyond the stars, glittering above, cold and distant? What spirits lurked in forests too deep for the fire's glow to touch? Sometimes the wind itself seemed to carry voices, low murmurs, laughter, or cries too faint to identify. The cavemen did not yet have words for gods, demons, or myths, but they felt them nonetheless. The night taught them imagination, and imagination was both gift and curse. It painted monsters larger than any lion, spirits hungrier than any wolf. It gave meaning to shadows and turned silence into whispers. When dawn finally came, its light was not simply morning, it was salvation. The first glow of pink and gold spreading across the horizon was greeted with sighs of relief, with laughter too tired to rise above whispers. Children crawled from their mothers' arms, blinking at the brightness. Hunters stretched, muscles stiff, pride restored with the sun's warmth. Elders muttered thanks in guttural tones, smearing ashes from their skin as though shedding fear itself. The predators melted back into the forest, their eyes no longer visible, their growls swallowed by the distance. The night, though survived, always left its mark. Some carried scars from restless dreams, some from real claws that had struck too close. But more than wounds, the night carved memories, reminders that existence was fragile, that life balanced always on the edge of darkness. And yet, in enduring that darkness together, the cavemen had discovered something more enduring than fear, hope. A fragile hope born of firelight, of companionship, of the certainty that if they could outlast the night, they could outlast anything. Stone, cold and unyielding, became the first true ally of humankind. For the caveman, it was not just a thing to stumble upon in the dirt, not just a lump beneath the feet, but the beginning of mastery over a world that had long ruled him with tooth and claw. When one hunter knelt beside a riverbank and struck a rock against another, watching flakes splinter off like shards of light, he unknowingly changed the future of his people. Those sharp fragments, jagged and biting, could pierce skin, slice meat, carve wood, and dig into soil. What had once been bare hands, weak against the hide of beasts and the bark of trees, now had an extension of power. This was the dawn of invention, the silent revolution hidden in the act of knapping stone. The discovery was not elegant, but born of trial and error, of accident and necessity. Sometimes a stone broke uselessly, crumbling to dust, while other times it revealed a shining edge that drew blood even with a careless touch. Cavemen learned to recognize which stones fractured cleanly and which dulled too quickly. Flint, obsidian, and quartz were treasured, carried from one camp to another, guarded as carefully as food itself. The elders taught the younger ones to hold the stone just right, to strike at an angle that sang rather than shattered, to see the tool hiding within the rock before it revealed itself. Each flake removed was a lesson in patience, each sharp edge a triumph over ignorance. Around campfires, sparks flew not just from flames, but from stone against stone, as hands practiced shaping the future. Tools transformed their days. With a stone knife, meat could be cut into pieces, easier to chew and safer to share. With scrapers, hides were cleaned and softened, transformed into warmth for the cold nights. With sharp points fixed onto wooden shafts, the hunt itself changed. No longer did men need to face beasts with bare strength. A thrown spear could strike from a distance, balancing the scales against predators that had ruled the night. In every strike of stone, the caveman whispered rebellion against nature's cruelty, proving he was no longer prey, but something more. Even the act of making tools became a ritual. Men sat in small groups, napping side by side, the rhythmic tapping like the heartbeat of progress. Children watched, wide-eyed, imitating the motions with pebbles until their hands blistered. Women, too, shaped stones, fashioning scrapers and knives, ensuring that hides became clothing, that food became nourishment. It was a communal craft, each flake of stone carrying the weight of survival. The firelight caught the edges of new blades, gleaming like stars fallen to earth, fragile but powerful. Tools were not just objects, they were symbols of ingenuity, proof that humans could mold the world to their will. With tools, their interaction with nature deepened. stones cut into wood, shaping handles, digging sticks, and clubs. Spears lengthened their reach, giving courage against beasts that once terrified them. Digging sticks turned soil to reveal roots and tubers hidden beneath, unlocking food once inaccessible. Hides, once discarded after the meat was eaten, were now preserved, scraped smooth, sewn with bone needles into coverings. Each innovation fed the next, a slow but unstoppable cascade of change. The caveman's world was still brutal, still cruel, but with stone in his hand, he carried a fragment of power that made survival a little less fragile. Yet tools were not without danger. A poorly struck flake could slice deep into flesh, leaving wounds that festered. A spear tip could snap at the worst moment, turning hunter into hunted. Sometimes, fights broke out over possession of the finest stones. Men argued, shouted, and clashed, for a single piece of obsidian could mean the difference between a full belly and an empty one, between life and death. In these quarrels, the tribe learned another lesson, that power lay not only in the stone itself, but in who controlled it. Hierarchies began to form, subtle at first, shaped by skill in crafting and ownership of materials. Those who mastered the art of stone knapping became respected, their knowledge as vital as food, the environment, to bore the mark of tools. Trees fell beneath sharpened axes, caves echoed with the sound of scraping hides, and animal bones showed cleaner cuts, evidence of precision. The forest, once indifferent, began to bend to human will in small but significant ways. No longer were they mere wanderers scavenging scraps. They were creators, reshaping the raw elements around them. The first sparks of technology had ignited, and though the caveman could not name it, he felt its weight every time he held a blade that extended his reach at night. When the fire roared and bellies were full, they admired their creations in silence. Fingers ran along sharp edges, careful not to press too hard, eyes reflecting both awe and fear. For in the stone they saw both salvation and danger, both hope and risk. A blade could protect, but it could also wound. A spear could hunt, but it could also kill a tribesman if anger boiled too high. In this duality lay the first awareness of responsibility, though they had no word for it. Tools gave power, and power demanded control. Generations passed, and with each passing, the tools grew more refined. Younger hands learned faster, their skills surpassing the clumsy strikes of elders. New shapes emerged: arrowheads, scrapers with serrated edges, chisels for carving. Each refinement was whispered from one fire to the next, from one tribe to another when paths crossed. Sometimes tools were traded for food, for hides, for companionship. This sharing spread knowledge wider than any single tribe, weaving a network of progress invisible but unstoppable. Stone connected them across valleys, rivers, and mountains. It was the first language that needed no words, only edges sharp enough to speak for themselves. For the cavemen, tools were more than survival, they were identity. To carry a blade was to declare oneself human, separate from beasts. To pass down a spear was to offer not just wood and stone, but the promise of life. Children who once played with pebbles grew to craft blades that would save their families. Elders, their hands too weak to hunt, still shaped flakes, contributing wisdom to the tribe. In every strike, in every shard, the caveman etched his story into the world. Thus, the age of bare hands gave way to the age of stone. The world had not grown kinder, but humans had grown sharper, cleverer, and infinitely more dangerous. The rock beneath their feet, once ignored, had become a weapon, a tool, a companion. In its weight, they carried not only survival, but the seed of everything yet to come. If hunting was the thunderous clash of life and death, then gathering was the steady heartbeat that carried the tribe through seasons of hunger. The caveman's survival depended not only on the courage of hunters who faced beasts, but on the quiet, tireless work of those who searched the forests, meadows, and riverbanks for food hidden in plain sight. Women, children, and elders often took on this task, their eyes trained to spot the smallest signs: a patch of berries ripening beneath thorny branches, roots peeking through soil after rainfall, nuts shaken loose from trees by the wind. Day after day, they walked paths worn smooth by countless feet, baskets woven from reeds slung across their shoulders, digging sticks clutched in hand. The forest became a second skin to them. They knew which leaves curled with poison, which flowers promised sweetness, which mushrooms glowed with death. Their knowledge, passed down in murmurs and gestures, was as vital as any spear carried by the hunters. Gathering was not easy, for the forest was deceptive. Fruits that glistened brightly in the morning sun could sicken the belly by nightfall. Mushrooms that seemed harmless sprouted beside others that killed silently. Bitter roots twisted beneath the earth, some nourishing, others poisonous. Elders tested by nibbling the smallest piece, waiting for the stomach's answer before offering it to others. Children learned to copy their mothers, not reaching out until given permission, their tiny fingers trembling with curiosity. Mistakes were costly. One mouthful of the wrong plant could weaken a body so badly that it could not rise again. These lessons carved themselves into memory, reinforced with every sigh of grief when someone failed to heed them. In this way, knowledge was not just inherited, but burned into the bones of each generation. Foraging carried dangers beyond poison. The forest belonged not only to humans, but to creatures with sharper teeth and swifter legs. While bending to dig roots, women sometimes felt the prickling of eyes on their backs, the silent gaze of wolves, leopards, or wild boars lurking unseen. Children, straying too far in their eagerness, could vanish into shadows where predators waited. Even insects carried their threats: swarms of biting flies, venomous spiders, stinging ants that crawled under hides. The act of gathering demanded constant vigilance. Women moved in groups, their voices low but steady, both to reassure children and to warn predators that they were not alone. Some carried crude clubs or sharpened sticks, but more often their defense lay in numbers and speed, in the knowledge that danger required swift retreat to the safety of firelight. For all its risks, gathering was the rhythm of daily life. It filled the baskets that fed the tribe when hunts failed, when storms kept hunters trapped in caves, when herds migrated beyond reach. A single day's walk could bring back berries stained deep red, roots caked in mud, nuts cracked open to reveal pale flesh, and herbs whose fragrance promised both flavor and healing. These treasures were shared around the fire, children licking juice from their fingers, elders chewing slowly with satisfaction. hunters restoring their strength for the next pursuit. Food from the forest balanced the uncertainty of the hunt, a steady trickle of sustenance that carried the tribe through scarcity. The work of foraging also shaped community bonds. While hunters often left at dawn in tense silence, gatherers filled the day with chatter. Women told stories as they walked, their voices weaving memories of ancestors and spirits into the air. Children laughed, playing games of who could find the most berries, who could carry the largest bundle of sticks. Elders offered advice, recalling seasons of plenty and seasons of famine, reminding the young that abundance was always temporary. These moments of togetherness built trust, ensured survival not only through food but through the comfort of belonging. Over time, the act of gathering became more than survival. It became knowledge of the land itself. Cavemen learned the seasons not by counting days, but by the flowering of plants, the ripening of fruits, the migration of birds. Spring brought tender shoots, summer offered berries and nuts, autumn gave roots, and winter demanded reliance on stored food and dried meat. Women and elders became living calendars, their eyes tuned to subtle changes, the tilt of the sun, the chill of the wind, the color of leaves. This wisdom ensured the tribe moved at the right time, settled near rivers when fish were plentiful, climbed hills when berries ripened, and retreated to caves when snow began to fall. Sometimes, foraging led to discovery. A bitter root, once avoided, revealed healing when boiled in water. A certain leaf, chewed during fevers, eased the burning of the body. A sap from a tree, sticky and fragrant, soothed wounds. Slowly, the tribe built an unwritten library of medicine, drawn not from scrolls or books, but from trial, error, and observation. Mothers passed these secrets to daughters, elders whispered them to attentive ears, and the knowledge lived on, etched not in ink, but in survival. These plants became the first doctors, the first healers, their power as crucial as the sharpest spear. But gathering was not always peaceful. There were moments when food was scarce, when baskets returned nearly empty, when the forest offered little but dry branches and shriveled roots. Hunger sharpened tempers, stirred suspicion. Some accused others of hoarding, of finding but not sharing. Quarrels flared, voices rose, and the fragile balance of unity trembled. Yet even in conflict, the tribe knew the truth. Without cooperation, they would starve. Forgiveness, reluctant but necessary, always followed, binding them once more in the silent agreement that survival demanded unity. At night, when the gatherers returned with baskets full, the tribe celebrated. Fires burned brighter, laughter echoed, and the smell of roasting roots mingled with the sweetness of berries crushed between fingers. Children danced, their mouths stained with juice, while hunters grunted approval between bites. These moments reminded them that life was more than fear, and struggle it was also joy, fleeting but precious. The forest had given, and for a while, the shadows outside seemed less menacing. Thus, gathering and foraging, though quieter than the hunt, carried equal weight in the story of survival. It was patience, vigilance, and wisdom made flesh. It was the steady rhythm that balanced the chaos of the chase, the gentle act that fed not only stomachs but spirits. Through it, the cavemen learned that survival was not only about strength, but about observation, memory, and unity. The forest, with all its dangers and gifts, became their silent teacher, shaping them into beings who could see more than beasts, who could plan, adapt, and endure. Fire was more than flame. It was life itself, captured from the heavens and guarded with desperate devotion. For the caveman, fire was not a casual tool or a luxury. It was the beating heart of existence, the single force that stood between him and the merciless cold, between his fragile body and the jaws of predators. Each spark struck from stone was a miracle, each glowing ember a treasure. The tribe treated fire as a living thing, a spirit that demanded constant feeding and respect. They circled around it as though around an elder, offering branches, bark, and dried grasses like gifts. Without it, their nights would collapse into terror, their food would rot, and their children would wither. With it, they had warmth, protection, and the first whisper of control over nature. At dawn, smoke rising from the camp was the sign of survival. Women stirred embers buried beneath ash, coaxing them back into flame with careful breaths. Children fetched twigs, proud to contribute, their laughter mixing with the crackling of kindling. Hunters, preparing for the day, crouched beside the fire to sharpen spears, using its light to see the fine edge of stone. Elders stretched their hands toward the warmth, their faces softening in its glow. Fire was not only a necessity, it was comfort, a reassurance that even in a hostile world, there was a circle of safety that no beast could cross. The power of fire reshaped daily life. Meat no longer needed to be eaten raw, with all the dangers of sickness that followed. Roasting transformed flesh, making it tender, safer, and more nourishing. Roots that were once bitter became edible after cooking, while herbs released flavors and healing when boiled in pots made from clay or stone. Fire extended the range of what could be eaten, unlocking new possibilities from the land. Around its glow, the tribe feasted not just on food, but on hope, for every meal was a reminder of mastery over hunger. Beyond nourishment, fire offered light. With it, the tribe stretched their days, carving tools, scraping hides, and telling stories long after the sun had vanished. The flames cast shadows against cave walls, shadows that danced and shifted, stirring the imagination. Elders pointed to them, shaping tales of ancestors, spirits, and beasts. Children stared wide-eyed, believing they saw figures of long-dead hunters, of animals larger than life. In this way, fire became the stage for the first stories, the cradle of myth, the canvas on which memory was painted. Its heat offered protection from the merciless cold. Winter nights that once froze the marrow of bones were now endured, huddled together, skins wrapped tight, fire blazing at the center. The tribe no longer scattered when snow fell. Instead, they gathered closer, their survival tethered to the flames. The fire became a bond that tied them to place, allowing them to settle in caves and return to the same spots season after season. It gave permanence to a life that had once been nothing but wandering. Most of all, fire was protection. Predators that prowled in the dark, bold and relentless, hesitated at the edge of its light. Lions snarled but kept their distance. Wolves circled but did not advance. And even the great bears turned away from its heat. The cavemen knew this instinctively, sensing the invisible wall fire built between them and the night. Spears could fight a beast, but fire could turn whole packs away. In the dance of its flames, they found a power no claw could match, yet fire demanded vigilance. It could die as easily as it was born. Rain could smother it, wind could scatter it, carelessness could let it fade into cold ashes. Thus, the tribe guarded it fiercely. Someone was always tasked with tending the flames, even through the night. Falling asleep on such a duty was unthinkable, for without fire, the tribe would awaken helpless in the dark. When they moved from one place to another, they carried embers wrapped in bark or moss, glowing coals carefully nurtured until they reached their next camp. Fire was not struck anew each time. It was passed from one day to the next like a living heirloom, a thread of continuity that stretched across seasons. The fire also inspired fear. Its flames could leap higher than expected, devouring wood and spreading into grass. More than once, a careless spark set hides alight, or a sudden gust scattered embers into the dry underbrush. In those moments, fire revealed its dual nature, protector and destroyer. The tribe shouted, stamped, and poured water to smother the hungry blaze, their hearts pounding with terror at the thought of losing control. They respected it as they might respect a dangerous animal, one that could be tamed but never fully trusted. In time, fire became sacred. Some tribes painted its image on cave walls, red spirals and dancing shapes meant to honor the flame. Others whispered to it, as if it could hear, thanking it for warmth and food. Its smoke rising into the sky was seen as a bridge to spirits, a message carried upward to unseen realms. The fire was not just practical. It was spiritual, the first altar of humanity. Even in their sleep, the cavemen dreamed of fire. Children dreamed of flames that grew tall as trees, devouring the sky. Hunters dreamed of carrying fire into the hearts of beasts, driving them away forever. Elders dreamed of a time before fire, shivering in endless dark, and woke grateful for its presence. It was stitched into their very being, a companion as vital as breath. Thus, fire was the axis on which their lives turned. It was meal and medicine, light and protection, comfort and fear, ritual and mystery. Without it, they were prey. With it, they were something more. They did not yet know the word civilization, but in fire's glow, they had taken their first step toward it. Rituals gave shape to the endless struggle of survival, softening the blows of chance and death with meaning, pattern, and hope. For the caveman, belief was not abstract. It was stitched into every action, every shadow, every sound carried on the wind. Life without rituals was unimaginable, because the world was vast, hostile, and full of mysteries they could not explain. Rituals were the compass by which they navigated the chaos, fragile but powerful bonds between their small tribe and the unseen forces they sensed in earth, sky, and fire. At the center of many rituals was fire. Its flames were believed to carry voices into the sky, linking humans to spirits that lived beyond sight. When hunters left for the forest, elders tossed herbs and dried leaves into the fire, watching the smoke spiral upward as a blessing. They muttered chants, words that made no sense to outsiders but carried weight to those who heard them, syllables passed down through generations. The hunters accepted these murmured blessings with solemn faces, gripping their spears tighter, believing the smoke would guide their steps and shield them from harm. When they returned, whether successful or empty-handed, the fire was again the stage for ritual. As the tribe thanked the spirits for survival itself, death brought its own ceremonies. To the caveman, a body was more than flesh, it was a vessel that once carried breath and spirit, and abandoning it without care felt dangerous, as if the spirit might linger angrily among the living. Some tribes laid their dead in shallow graves within caves, covering them with stones and sprinkling ochre powder like blood, a symbolic return to the earth. Others placed tools, beads, or animal bones beside the body, gifts for the journey to whatever lay beyond. Children watched wide-eyed, learning early that life was fragile and death was not an end but a passage. Around the burial, low chants rose, a sound of mourning and respect, binding the tribe in collective memory. Hunting itself was surrounded by ritual. Before the chase, hunters painted their faces with clay or charcoal, marking themselves with lines that symbolized strength or speed. They mimicked animal movements, crouching like lions, stretching like deer, as if borrowing power from their prey. Some struck the ground with their spears, calling to the earth for luck. When the animal finally fell, its death was never treated lightly. The tribe approached the body with reverence, touching it with their palms, whispering thanks. They saw animals not just as food, but as beings who gave their lives so humans could live. Blood was sometimes smeared on foreheads as a mark of gratitude, a reminder that survival was bought with sacrifice. Seasons, too, brought rituals. The waxing and waning of the moon, the shifting of stars, and the slow turn of weather were signs that shaped their rhythms. The first snow was greeted with fires built high, flames meant to push back the icy spirits. The arrival of spring was celebrated with dances under the full moon, bodies swaying in patterns that mimicked growth and rebirth. Children ran barefoot, shouting in joy, while elders raised their hands to the sky, acknowledging forces beyond comprehension. In these moments, the tribe became more than a band of survivors. They became a community united by awe and gratitude. Dreams held deep meaning in their beliefs. To the cavemen, dreams were not illusions but messages. A dream of falling might mean danger ahead. A dream of water might signal rain. A dream of a beast might warn of an encounter. Storytellers listened to dreams as if interpreting the voice of the unseen. Tribes sometimes altered their plans, a hunt delayed, a journey postponed because of a dream. This gave individuals a sense of connection to the greater unknown, a feeling that even sleep was part of the dialogue with the universe. Illness and healing were framed by ritual, too. A sick child might be brushed with smoke from herbs, believed to drive away the spirits of disease. A shaman, wrapped in animal skins, would shake rattles or beat drums, invoking unseen powers. Healers painted symbols on skin with clay or ash, marks thought to guard the weak. Even if the illness ran its course, the ritual gave the family comfort, as though they had acted to shield their loved ones from the invisible dot. Birth was another sacred moment. When a woman labored, the tribe gathered close, women chanting softly, men feeding the fire until its glow filled the shelter. Once the child emerged, cries filled the night, blending with the chants in a celebration of life's continuation. The newborn might be held up toward the smoke, introduced to both tribe and spirit. A name was given, often inspired by the season, the weather, or the hunt of that day, a link between the child and the world around them, perhaps. The most haunting rituals were those performed in caves. By firelight, the walls became canvases where symbols and animals were painted. Bison, horses, and mammoths galloped in ochre and charcoal across stone, frozen mid-motion, yet alive in the imagination. These were not mere decorations, but acts of magic, ways of binding prey to hunter, of ensuring abundance. Drums echoed, shadows flickered, and chants filled the air as if summoning spirits from the stone itself. Children clung to their mothers, both frightened and enthralled, as elders spoke of ancestors who still watched from the walls. Such beliefs wove meaning into hardship. They turned hunger into ceremony, death into passage, and fire into a god. They gave reason to the rising of the sun and the falling of the rain. In a world where danger lurked at every turn, rituals gave cavemen a sense of order, a fragile but essential faith that life was not random chaos. Belief, like fire, was a tool for survival intangible, yet as necessary as water, food, and shelter. Life in the Stone Age was not lived alone. Survival demanded togetherness, and in that necessity, the first seeds of family and society took root. Cavemen understood instinctively that a lone hunter, no matter how strong, could not endure forever against cold, hunger, and predators. It was the group, the tribe, that gave protection, food, and comfort. Within these groups, smaller bonds formed between mother and child, between mates, between elders and youth. These bonds were not merely biological, but deeply emotional, carrying joy, grief, pride, and sacrifice. Family life was fragile, yet powerful, a foundation upon which humanity began to rise. At the core of family stood the mother. She was both nurturer and teacher, carrying the newborn in skins strapped to her chest, nursing through long nights by the fire. Children clung to her hands as they learned to walk, listened to her voice as she whispered simple stories, and watched her gather roots or berries with patient skill. The mother's role was sacred, for she carried continuity itself. Without her, the fragile chain of life would break. Around her, sisters, aunts, and other women of the tribe shared duties, caring for one another's children as if they were their own. This communal care meant that no child was ever truly alone. Every adult became a guardian, every elder a guide. Fathers and hunters bore different responsibilities. They were the risk-takers, venturing into the wilderness to face beasts and return with meat. Their bond with their children was quieter, expressed in gestures rather than words, lifting a child high on their shoulders, carving a small wooden toy from leftover wood, or teaching a boy to throw a stone. Their pride was not in speaking, but in showing, in passing down the skills that ensured survival. Yet even in their toughness, moments of tenderness shone through the smile of a father who sees his child run toward him after a long hunt, or the pride of watching a son's first successful throw. Elders were the keepers of memory. Bent with age, their steps slow, they no longer hunted or gathered, but their importance was immense. Around the fire, they retold stories of ancestors, battles fought, hunts won and lost, lessons carved into memory by hardship. Children listened in awe, while younger adults nodded, grounding themselves in the wisdom of those who had lived longer than the rest. Elders also mediated disputes, reminding the tribe of unity when jealousy or rivalry threatened to divide them. Their presence was proof that survival was possible. that years could be endured and carried into old age. Children themselves carried joy and hope. They were loud, curious, and restless, running barefoot through grass, climbing rocks, mimicking the calls of birds. They tested limits, touched fire despite warnings, laughed when caught in rain. For the tribe, children were more than individuals. They were symbols that life would continue. Their cries, their play, their laughter were reassurance that humanity would not fade. When one child was lost to sickness or accident, grief struck the entire tribe, echoing louder than any predator's roar. In mourning, they drew closer together, holding one another as if to protect the living from the same fate. Social bonds extended beyond family lines. Food was shared across the tribe. A successful hunter fed not only his mate and children, but the elders, the widows, the orphaned. This sharing ensured that no one was abandoned, for abandonment meant death. In return, those who could not hunt offered other services, watching over fires, gathering fuel, weaving nets, preparing hides. In this way, balance was maintained. Each member was a thread in the fabric of survival, and if one thread broke, the fabric weakened. Love existed, though expressed differently than in later civilizations. It was a glance across a fire, a hand offered after a fall, a piece of meat saved for another. Bonds formed between mates who relied on one another for years, raising children, facing winters, and surviving hunts. Jealousy, too, appeared when bonds were threatened, sometimes leading to conflict, sometimes resolved by elders' guidance. These emotions, love, jealousy, pride, grief, were not inventions of later humanity, but eternal. As old as the first families who huddled in caves, community rituals reinforced these bonds. Dances around the fire, feasts after hunts, chants during storms all gave the tribe moments of unity. In these moments, they were not just individuals, but one body, one voice. The fire lit not only their faces, but their shared belonging. A child falling asleep in a mother's lap, a father leaning against the cave wall after a long day, an elder humming an old chant. These were the images of family life, fragile yet enduring. And when tragedy struck, when a hunter did not return, when disease stole a child, when an elder closed their eyes for the last time, the tribe carried the burden together. They wept as one, mourned as one, and remembered as one. Grief, though heavy, bound them more tightly, reminding them that life was precious, fleeting, and worth protecting. Thus, social bonds and family life were not luxuries, but the very essence of existence. Without them, the cavemen would have remained prey. With them, he became something greater. In those bonds lay the blueprint of humanity's future. Love that endured, cooperation that lifted, memory that guided. The flicker of firelight on faces, leaning close, sharing food, telling stories, and holding one another, that was the true heartbeat of the Stone Age. Violence was as ancient as survival itself, for even in the earliest days of humanity, the struggle for food, territory, and safety sometimes demanded more than words or gestures. Cavemen were not born with the tools of war, yet necessity drove them to shape the first weapons with the same stones they once used to cut meat or scrape hides. What began as tools for hunting slowly transformed into instruments of defense, then into weapons of attack. And from these crude beginnings rose the shadow of organized conflict. The first weapon was the hand itself, fists striking, fingers grasping stones, arms hurling them with desperate strength. But soon the caveman realized that stones could be shaped, sharpened, and wielded with purpose. A jagged edge became a blade. A heavy rock lashed to a stick became a hammer. A spear carved from a long branch, hardened by fire, became both hunting tool and weapon of war. These objects were crude by later standards, yet in the hands of desperate men they were deadly. A sharpened spear thrust into flesh ended not only the life of animals, but of rivals who threatened the tribe. Conflict often began with hunger. When game was scarce and rivers dried, tribes drifted into the same valleys, both seeking food, both unwilling to turn away. At first, they might glare from across a clearing, voices raised, hands gesturing, posturing like beasts. But when words and intimidation failed, stones flew and spears followed. The clash was brutal, chaotic, and short. Unlike later battles fought with strategy, these first wars were explosions of violence, men charging with roars, women clutching children, elders shouting warnings. Blood spilled quickly, and often one side broke and fled, leaving behind the wounded and the dead. Weapons reshaped these encounters. A tribe with sharpened stone blades held advantage over one that still fought with sticks. Those who discovered how to bind stone to wood with sinew or fiber became stronger, striking from greater distance, killing more swiftly. Knowledge of weapon making spread slowly, guarded as treasure by some tribes, stolen in blood by others. To lose weapons in combat was to risk extinction, for in the harsh world of the Stone Age, unarmed tribes could not defend themselves. Fear, too, was a weapon. Warriors painted their bodies with ash, clay, or blood, transforming themselves into fearsome figures. Faces streaked with dark lines, hair spiked with grease, bodies smeared with ochre. Such displays made them appear larger than life, half human, half spirit. Shouts and drumbeats echoed through forests, shaking the hearts of enemies even before battle began. The psychological power of weapons lay not only in their edge, but in the terror they inspired. Yet war was never constant. Tribes knew the cost: lost hunters, hungry children, wounded bodies. Often they avoided conflict, negotiating through gifts of meat or women, or simply withdrawing to safer lands. But when resources tightened or insults could not be ignored, bloodshed. In these moments, the first weapons of war proved themselves. Spears thrust into flesh, stones smashed against skulls, sharpened bones pierced skin. Pain, suffering, and loss were as real then as they are now. Victory in battle was celebrated, but not with joy. Survivors returned with heavy faces, bearing wounds that marked them for life. Women tended gashes with herbs, elders muttered chants over the fallen, and children watched in silence, learning that survival was painted with blood. The spoils of war were meager, perhaps control of a waterhole, perhaps meat, perhaps captives, but they were vital. For those who lost, exile or death awaited. For a defeated tribe often could not endure another winter. Still, weapons did more than destroy. They united tribes, binding warriors together in loyalty and courage. Men stood side by side, trusting their comrades to guard their backs, their mates and children watching from the safety of caves. Bonds forged in combat were deep, stronger than kinship at times, because they were tested in fire and blood. A spear raised in defense of the tribe became not only a weapon but a symbol of belonging, of sacrifice for the greater whole. Weapons also gave humans power over beasts larger and stronger than themselves. A spear thrust in unison by several hunters could bring down a mammoth. A rain of stones could drive back lions. The same weapons that killed rivals also carved humanity's dominance over nature. This dual use blurred the line between hunting and warfare, making violence seem both natural and necessary. But behind every weapon was fear. Fear of starvation, fear of loss, fear of death. Weapons were born from desperation, sharpened by necessity, wielded in trembling hands as much as in strong ones. The first warriors were not fearless heroes, but men with pounding hearts, fighting because they had no choice. Their weapons were crude, but their courage was immense, their will to survive unshakable. Thus, the first weapons of war were more than tools of death. They were the earliest symbols of human power and fragility. They revealed that survival was not only about gathering food or finding shelter, but also about defending what was theirs, even at terrible cost. With each sharpened spear, with each stone blade, humanity took another step toward the long history of conflict that would shape the world. Territory was life in the Stone Age. A fertile valley, a river rich with fish, or a cave with sheltering stone walls could mean survival through winter, while barren lands meant hunger and death. Because the world was vast yet dangerous, tribes clung to places that offered safety and sustenance, and in doing so, they came into conflict with others who sought the same ground. Rivalry between tribes was not born of greed but of necessity, yet once kindled, it carried the seeds of hatred, vengeance, and blood that echoed across generations. At first, the boundaries of territory were invisible, marked not by fences or walls, but by memory and presence. A tribe knew the bends of its river, the ridges of its hills, the paths where game passed each season. These lands were etched into their stories, tied to their rituals, woven into their sense of self. When strangers appeared on those grounds, faces unfamiliar, accents strange, spears raised defensively, the air thickened with tension. Words were attempted, gestures exchanged, sometimes gifts of meat or stones offered to avoid bloodshed. But when resources ran low or insults stung, words gave way to violence, and rivalry hardened into enmity. Encounters between rival tribes often began at water. Rivers were arteries of life, feeding not only thirst but animals, plants, and fish. To control a river was to control survival itself. Thus, two groups might meet on its banks, each refusing to yield. They would glare across the water, children pulled behind their mothers, warriors brandishing spears. One side might shout threats, the other reply with mockery, until a stone was hurled or a spear thrust across the current. In the chaos that followed, blood mixed with the river's flow, and the victor claimed the water as his own. The defeated, if not slaughtered, fled into harsher lands, haunted by thirst and hunger. Territory was also measured in caves. A cave was more than shelter, it was fortress, home, and temple. To seize a cave from another tribe was to take their heart. Battles for caves were savage, fought in the flickering dark, stone against stone, bodies crashing against walls. The echoes of screams mingled with the roar of fire as invaders tried to smoke rivals out, filling tunnels with choking smoke. Survivors staggered into the night, leaving behind the bones of kin and the echoes of their grief. Victors claimed the cave, but its walls held memories of violence, shadows that never faded. Seasonal migrations added to rivalry. Tribes followed herds of mammoths or reindeer across plains, and when paths converged, conflict was inevitable. One tribe might drive animals toward pits or traps, only to see another swoop in to claim the kill. Arrows of stone whistled through the air, spears clashed, and the earth was stained with blood of both man and beast. The hunters who triumphed gained not only meat, but pride, while the defeated limped away with empty hands, their children crying with hunger. Such encounters burned into memory, fueling vengeance that returned in later seasons. Yet rivalry was not always open war. Tribes sometimes stalked one another silently, shadows in the trees, watching, measuring. They might steal food, sabotage traps, or raid in the night, striking swiftly and vanishing into the dark. These acts of stealth left fear in their wake, gnawing at the minds of survivors. Mothers whispered warnings to children. Fires were kept burning longer, and warriors slept with spears at their sides. The threat of rivals was constant, shaping daily life as much as hunger or weather. Territory shaped identity. A tribe that lived in forests moved like shadows among trees, skilled in ambush, their spears short and sharp. A tribe of plains moved like the wind, fast runners with long spears for throwing. Mountain tribes carried muscles hardened by climbing, their stones sharpened from granite cliffs. These differences made each tribe unique, but also made them rivals, as each defended not only land but way of life. To lose territory was to lose self, for the land was mother, father, and spirit all at once. Memory deepened rivalry. A tribe that lost hunters to another never forgot. Children grew up hearing stories of betrayal and blood, their anger nurtured like embers until it flared in adulthood. Vengeance raids followed, cycles of violence spiraling until generations later. Tribes still bled for insults no living soul remembered. Territory disputes turned into vendettas, carving scars into the history of humanity. Still, not every encounter ended in war. Some rivalries softened into uneasy alliances. Tribes might share a valley in different seasons, trading tools, beads, or mates. A drought or harsh winter sometimes forced cooperation, with two groups hunting together or pooling food. In these fragile truces lay the seeds of future cooperation. Proof that even in rivalry, humans could glimpse the possibility of peace. But such peace was always fragile, for hunger, pride, or death could shatter it in an instant. The cost of rivalry was heavy. Broken families, scattered tribes, lost children. Survivors carried grief like weight, eyes hollowed by loss. Yet they carried on because they had no choice. They buried their dead, tended their wounds, and raised their spears once more. For in the Stone Age, territory was not luxury, it was the thin line between life and death. Thus, rival tribes and their struggles over land marked one of the first great patterns of human history. From caves to rivers, plains to mountains, the earth itself became contested ground, soaked with blood and memory. In the endless push and pull for territory, humanity learned both the power of unity within and the cruelty of division without. These rivalries, born of survival, foreshadowed the wars and borders that would shape civilizations for millennia to come. In the earliest days of human struggle, when survival hinged on fire, shelter, and the strength of one's hand gripping a stone, tribes were not guided by written law or kings. Yet, even among the scattered groups of hunter-gatherers, the faint outlines of leadership began to take shape, emerging not from crowns or thrones, but from necessity itself. Leadership was born in the moments when hesitation meant death, when a voice could steady trembling hands, and when a single figure could unite the fearful into a force strong enough to endure. These leaders were not rulers in the modern sense, but they were the sparks of authority, the primitive shepherds of fragile humanity. At first, leadership manifested quietly. A skilled hunter who could strike a deer with a stone-tipped spear from across a clearing naturally gained the respect of others. His actions fed children and filled bellies, so his words carried weight. An elder who knew which berries cured illness or which roots healed wounds was consulted before any risk was taken. A watchful woman who spotted danger on the horizon, who warned of predators before others noticed, was trusted for her vigilance. Each of these individuals embodied leadership in different forms: strength, wisdom, foresight. Slowly, tribes came to rely on them not only for survival, but for direction. Leadership was most visible during the hunt. Before the chase, men and women gathered at the edge of forests or plains, nerves sharp, breath tight with anticipation. Someone had to decide where to move, when to strike, and how to trap the quarry. In such moments, a confident voice cut through uncertainty, a hand pointing toward the herd, a whisper urging patience, a command to release spears. That voice was followed, not because it demanded obedience, but because it carried knowledge proven in the past. In this way, the leader became the anchor of the hunt, the figure others watched for signals, the one whose success or failure determined whether bellies were full or empty. Yet leadership extended beyond food. It carried into the hearth, where tribes huddled around fires, debating which caves to occupy or which valleys to cross. Fear of rival tribes, of predators lurking in shadows, demanded collective decisions. And without a guiding voice, chaos threatened. Here, the leader's role shifted. Not hunter, but mediator. Not warrior, but peacemaker. The leader weighed different opinions, calmed arguments, and sought a path forward that held the tribe together. When disputes threatened to split the group, the leader's presence could prevent fracture. His or her words became like fire itself, keeping unity warm, preventing the cold bite of division. Leaders were not always the strongest. Often, they were the ones who carried scars, both visible and invisible. A hunter who had lost kin to a lion attack spoke with a gravity others respected. His warnings were carved from pain. An elder who had survived countless winters, whose body bent with age, guided with memory sharper than any spear. Even the tribe's spiritual figures, the ones who gazed at the stars, who murmured to the flames, who claimed to sense whispers of ancestors, held power. For they gave meaning to suffering and courage to the fearful. Leadership was thus woven from strength, experience, wisdom, and belief, forming a tapestry that bound the tribe together. But leadership was not without cost. To lead meant to bear the weight of failure. If a hunt ended in disaster, the leader felt the eyes of the hungry upon him. If a migration led to barren lands, mothers whispered their discontent, and warriors questioned his judgment. A wrong decision could unravel respect, leaving the leader exposed to challenge. In some tribes, failed leaders were cast aside, their authority stripped, their voices silenced by mockery or exile. Others were killed outright, their blood a warning that leadership was a fragile gift, easily lost when trust broke. Thus, leadership in these primitive times was a constant test, renewed each day by survival itself. At times, rival voices arose, challenging authority. A younger hunter might argue that he saw prey better, that his arms were stronger. An elder might insist that the spirits demanded a different path. These tensions shaped early forms of politics, subtle as they were. Leaders learned to balance authority with humility, to share decisions while still guiding firmly. Those who ruled with cruelty or arrogance often faced rebellion, as even the smallest tribes could unite against tyranny. The lesson of early leadership was simple. Authority was not given once, but earned repeatedly, woven from action, respect, and survival. Leadership also bound itself to the spiritual realm. Many tribes believed that their leaders carried the blessings of unseen forces, that their success in hunting or war reflected the will of ancestors or spirits. A leader who failed too often was thought to have lost this favor, and ceremonies might be performed to restore it or to replace him with another. Fire rituals, chants beneath the moon, or offerings left at rivers were all tied to the leader's legitimacy, making his role not just practical but sacred. In this way, leadership transcended the physical, becoming both earthly and divine, an echo of the chiefs and kings that would one day rise. The tribe's bond to its leader was also emotional. Children admired him, copying the way he walked or the manner in which he threw a spear. Women sought his protection, while elders whispered advice in his ear, hoping their wisdom guided him. Warriors followed him into danger, their trust binding them together. This emotional connection forged unity, transforming a collection of individuals into a tribe. Without leadership, they were scattered voices. With it, they were a chorus, a force that could endure storms, hunger, and enemies. And yet, leaders were human. They wept in secret, trembled at failure, and feared the weight of lives depending on them. They too stared into the fire at night, wondering if their choices doomed their people. This vulnerability made their role all the more remarkable, for in stepping forward to lead, they accepted burdens others shrank from, becoming both the shield and the target, the heart and the hand of their people. Thus, in the earliest struggles of humankind, the first signs of leadership were born not as crowns, not as empires, but as voices of courage rising against silence. These primitive leaders carved the path toward civilization, teaching humanity that survival required not only tools and fire, but guidance and unity. Their echoes remain in every leader who has ever stood at the edge of uncertainty and chosen to step forward, carrying others into the unknown. Revenge was one of the earliest flames to burn in the human heart, as old as hunger, as primal as fear. In the brutal world of the Stone Age, survival meant constant struggle. But when a loved one was killed by beast, by rival, or by accident of nature, survival alone no longer sufficed. A deeper urge stirred within the tribe, a demand not only for food or shelter, but for justice, however raw. This justice took the form of vengeance, a fire that consumed those who lost kin and bound them together in the pursuit of blood for blood. Though survival often demanded unity and pragmatism, revenge demanded risk and sacrifice, pulling the tribe into battles that were not always rational, but were always deeply human. The fire of revenge usually began with grief. Imagine a family gathered over the broken body of a hunter, speared by rivals, his blood soaking into the dirt, his breath fading. His mother wails, tearing her hair. His wife collapses, clutching their child to her chest. The warriors stand in silence, their jaws clenched, eyes burning. In the stillness, something takes root: anger, shame, and the desperate need to restore balance. To let the killer live would feel like betrayal, as though the dead were abandoned. Thus, revenge became not only an act of violence, but a sacred duty carried in whispered oaths around the fire, promised to the spirits of the fallen. Revenge was not always immediate. Often, the tribe waited, watched, planned. Days might pass, then weeks, as warriors tracked the movements of rivals, learning their patterns, seeking weakness. The fire of revenge smoldered in silence, hidden beneath daily life. Children were taught to remain quiet, women were instructed to prepare food secretly, and hunters sharpened their spears at night. The entire tribe carried the weight of vengeance, every act infused with anticipation. The moment of retaliation was not simply battle, it was a performance of justice, a ritual of restoration. When the moment came, it was swift and brutal. Warriors crept through forests before dawn, feet silent on leaves damp with dew. Their faces were painted with ash, disguising features, transforming them into shadows. Spears glinted faintly in the dim light. They waited outside the rivals' camp, listening to the soft breathing of those asleep until the leader gave the signal. Then chaos erupted, spears thrust into sleeping bodies, flames set to huts, screams splitting the night. Revenge raids were not battles of honor, but massacres, designed to leave survivors haunted, to carve fear into their bones. Blood was spilled, not only to kill, but to send a message. Our grief has weight. Our dead will not rest until balanced by yours. The cycle of revenge, once started, rarely ended. Survivors of such raids bore scars, both physical and emotional, and in their turn, they vowed retaliation. Thus, vengeance spiraled into endless conflict, tribe against tribe, family against family. Children grew up hearing stories of their fathers' or mothers' deaths, taught that honor required repayment. They sharpened their first spears, not only for hunting, but for avenging. The fire of revenge leaped from generation to generation, its flames kept alive by memory and storytelling. In this way, vengeance was woven into the very fabric of tribal identity, becoming both curse and bond. Yet revenge was not only physical, it was spiritual. Many tribes believed that the spirits of the dead lingered, restless, until avenged. To neglect vengeance was to dishonor ancestors, to invite misfortune, to weaken the tribe's bond with the unseen. Rituals were held before raids. Hunters smeared their bodies with blood. Women sang dirges to the fallen. Elders chanted to call upon spirits for guidance. Vengeance thus took on a sacred dimension, elevating murder into ritual justice. Every spear thrust became an offering, every scream of the dying a hymn to the balance of the world. The fire of revenge burned not only in the heart, but in the soul, demanding to be fed. However, revenge also tore at unity. A leader who failed to pursue vengeance risked losing respect, branded as weak or cowardly. Families demanded action, their grief pressing upon the tribe like a weight. Leaders faced impossible choices: avenge and risk lives in raids, or restrain and risk the tribe splintering. Some tribes fractured entirely, half seeking blood, half seeking peace. In these divisions lay the first seeds of political struggle, as the urge for revenge clashed with the urge for survival. Thus, vengeance not only united but divided, testing the very bonds of community. The psychological toll was immense. Survivors of raids often carried their trauma silently, eyes haunted by images of slaughter. Children awakened in the night, screaming of fire and blood. Women who had lost husbands, brothers, or sons wept for years, their grief becoming a permanent wound. Even victorious warriors were not free. They too carried nightmares of those they killed, hearing screams in the wind, seeing faces in the flames. Revenge consumed not only enemies, but avengers themselves, burning from within, leaving ash in its wake. Still, the fire of revenge endured because it gave meaning. In a harsh world where death came suddenly and often, vengeance offered a sense of control, a belief that balance could be restored. It transformed grief into action, despair into purpose. Even when it destroyed lives, it sustained spirits, reminding tribes that they were not helpless against cruelty. In this paradox, revenge became one of humanity's oldest and most enduring instincts, shaping both individuals and tribes in profound ways. In the aftermath of conflict, when the echoes of battle faded into silence and the scent of blood still clung to the earth, tribes discovered a strange and powerful truth. Unity was often born not in peace, but in shared violence and memory. The fire of revenge, once unleashed, did more than punish enemies. It forged bonds among survivors, binding them with threads of loyalty, pride, and grief. For in a world where life was fragile and fleeting, nothing created togetherness more strongly than the act of standing side by side, spears raised, hearts pounding, fighting as one. The return from a raid was always charged with emotion. Warriors arrived, carrying trophies, skulls, bones, scraps of clothing, or weapons seized from their enemies. These objects were not mere prizes. They were proof of courage, physical tokens of vengeance fulfilled. As the tribe gathered around fires to see them, a sense of unity spread. Children stared wide-eyed at the warriors. Women sang songs of triumph, and elders nodded with solemn pride. The victory was not just for the warriors, but for every soul in the tribe, a collective achievement born of shared purpose. Unity in blood was a fragile yet potent force, reminding each member that survival required not only food and fire, but loyalty and courage. But this unity was always shadowed by memory. Each triumph carried the ghosts of those who had fallen. Around the fire, stories were told of the dead, their names spoken with reverence, their deeds exalted. These stories were repeated night after night, season after season, until memory itself became ritual. Children grew up hearing them, their identities shaped by the deeds of their ancestors. In this way, memory preserved not only the pain of loss but the pride of vengeance, passing it forward as a legacy of strength. Blood and memory entwined, becoming inseparable, forming the foundation of tribal identity. Rituals often emerged from this unity. After raids, tribes painted their faces with blood, danced around the fire, and sang songs of both sorrow and triumph. The dances were wild, bodies moving like shadows, voices echoing into the night. Flames cast flickering shapes across cave walls, transforming warriors into spirits, mothers into mourners, children into witnesses. These rituals were not mere celebrations. They were acts of remembrance, binding the tribe together in a collective performance of survival. By dancing and chanting, they transformed grief into unity, vengeance into tradition, memory into power. Unity in blood also reshaped the roles within tribes. Warriors became more than hunters, they were protectors, symbols of the tribe's strength. Women became keepers of memory, ensuring that the names of the fallen were never forgotten. Elders became interpreters of history, linking present conflicts to ancient stories, teaching lessons drawn from cycles of revenge and survival. Children grew into their roles by listening, learning, and eventually stepping into the circle of vengeance and unity themselves. In this way, each person carried part of the weight, and unity was reinforced generation after generation. Still, this unity was fragile. It was always tied to blood and memory, and both carried heavy costs. To maintain unity, the tribe had to keep memory alive, which meant reliving grief again and again. Every story reopened wounds. Every ritual reminded them of pain. Some tribes were consumed by these cycles, trapped in endless remembrance, unable to imagine peace. Unity in blood gave them strength, but it also chained them to vengeance, binding their identity to violence. Without enemies to fight, they sometimes turned inward, old resentments flaring, memory twisting into rivalry within. Thus, the same unity that preserved them could also fracture them, a double-edged weapon. Despite this danger, unity in blood and memory shaped the very essence of humanity. It created loyalty stronger than fear, bonds deeper than hunger. Tribes that fought together, mourned together, and remembered together stood stronger than those fractured by selfishness. They were willing to risk their lives for one another, to endure hardship and hunger, to confront enemies far stronger than themselves. Unity gave them purpose, transforming fragile groups of individuals into something larger, something enduring. Without it, survival might have been impossible. With it, humanity began to carve a path toward the future. Even in the quiet moments after raids, when fire crackled and warriors rested, the unity remained palpable. A shared glance between hunters, a child sitting proudly beside his father, a woman placing food into the hands of those who returned, all were acts of connection, small threads that wove the tribe into a whole. These threads were reinforced by memory, by the constant retelling of who they were, where they came from, and what they had suffered together. In this way, identity and unity were inseparable, each feeding the other, both rooted in blood and remembrance. The echoes of this primitive unity stretch into the present. Modern civilizations may not raid rival tribes with spears, but the same instinct remains. The urge to rally together in times of danger, to find identity in shared memory, to honor the fallen with rituals, stories, and monuments. The Stone Age tribes, bound by blood and memory, laid the foundation for all human communities that followed. Their unity was raw, forged in fire and sharpened in pain, but it was powerful enough to shape history itself. Without it, humanity might have remained scattered shadows, lost in the wilderness. With it, they became the ancestors of nations, cultures, and civilizations. Thus, the unity born of blood and memory was both a gift and a curse, binding tribes together, giving them strength, but also chaining them to endless cycles of vengeance. It was the paradox at the heart of early humanity, that the very thing that preserved them could also destroy them. Yet, without it, the fragile spark of human survival might never have endured long enough to see the dawn of the future. Long before words were carved into tablets or stories were written onto parchment, humanity found its first canvas in the walls of caves. These caves, dark and silent, became the earliest temples of imagination, where flickering firelight revealed colors smeared onto stone and shadows danced with meaning. To step inside such a space was to enter both a memory and a dream, for the figures etched in ochre and charcoal were not mere decorations, but glimpses into the inner life of our ancestors. Here, in these painted sanctuaries, imagination took its first breath, transforming fear, memory, and hope into images that would outlast the beating hearts of those who made them. The process of creating these paintings was itself a ritual. Hunters and gatherers did not simply wander into caves and begin to smear pigments on stone. They prepared themselves with reverence, as though entering a sacred realm. Women crushed red ochre into fine dust, mixing it with fat or water to create paint. Men sharpened sticks into brushes, while others used hollowed bones to blow pigment-like mist across their hands pressed against the wall. The result was a ghostly impression, a human presence captured in stone, as though to say, "We were here, we existed, remember us." These prints, multiplied across the walls, gave the impression of an eternal gathering, hands stretching out through time. The subjects of these paintings were not chosen at random. Most depicted animals, bison, horses, mammoths, deer creatures, both feared and revered. Each figure was drawn with care, its muscles outlined, its horns exaggerated, its movement captured in strokes of charcoal. To paint an animal was not merely to record it. It was to summon its spirit, to honor its life, or perhaps to seek power over it. Hunters might believe that by painting a herd of bison, they called it closer, increasing the chances of success. A spear etched into the flank of a painted deer was more than art, it was magic, a symbolic hunt performed before the real one. In this way, the imagination of cavemen blurred into ritual, their art inseparable from their survival. Yet not all images were of animals. Some walls carried strange, abstract patterns, zigzags, spirals, dots, and lines. These symbols puzzled even the people who stared at them in wonder, for they were glimpses of something beyond the visible world. Perhaps they represented rivers or stars, perhaps visions seen in dreams, perhaps memories of voices carried by the wind. Whatever their meaning, they revealed that imagination was not bound to the tangible, but reached toward the unseen, the mysterious. These patterns became the earliest forms of thought made visible, the spark of writing before words existed. The act of painting also transformed the cave into a living theater. As fires burned, shadows danced across the walls, making the painted animals appear to move. Bison seemed to run, deer leaped, mammoths charged. Children gasped at the illusion, while adults watched in awe, seeing in the flickering light a union of art and spirit. The cave became both stage and temple, a place where imagination and reality overlapped. In this atmosphere, stories were told, hunters describing their battles with great beasts, elders explaining the origin of the stars, mothers weaving dreams for their children. The cave walls, alive with painted images, became both memory and prophecy, reminding the tribe of who they were and hinting at what they might become. Dreams themselves fed this imagination. In sleep, cavemen encountered worlds as vivid as waking life. They ran with animals, spoke with ancestors, flew through the sky, or descended into darkness. These dreams, recounted around fires, inspired the symbols on walls. A hunter who dreamed of a lion might paint its image the next day, believing the dream a warning. A woman who dreamed of rain might mark spirals onto stone, hoping to call storms. Children who dreamed of flight described wings, inspiring shapes carved into stone. Dreams blurred into art, and art into ritual, creating a cycle of imagination that deepened with each generation. Imagination also offered comfort. In a world ruled by hunger and fear, where death was always near, the ability to imagine gave meaning to suffering. When a child died, the tribe might paint his hand on the wall, ensuring his spirit remained with them. When hunters fell, their stories were etched into stone, so their bravery would not vanish. Imagination gave permanence to what was fleeting, creating a sense of continuity that soothed grief. Through art, the tribe believed they could defy death itself, preserving memory in pigment and stone. But imagination was not only about grief and survival, it was also about beauty. The artists among cavemen found joy in the curve of a mammoth's tusk, the rhythm of hoofbeats, the play of light on stone. They delighted in the act of creation, even when no ritual demanded it. Children smeared paint for fun, leaving handprints too small to belong to warriors. Women decorated walls with simple shapes, adding color to darkness. In these acts, imagination revealed itself as more than a tool. It was a source of joy, curiosity, and wonder. Humanity was not only a creature of survival, but of creativity, capable of finding beauty in the harshest of worlds. The legacy of these painted dreams is profound. Thousands of years later, the colors remain vivid, the figures still alive. Modern eyes gaze at them with awe, recognizing in their strokes the same impulse that drives poets, musicians, and painters today. These caves were the first galleries, their walls the first pages, their creators the first storytellers. They remind us that imagination is not an invention of civilization, but its foundation, older than agriculture, older than cities, older than writing itself. It was imagination that transformed humanity from animals into dreamers, from survivors into creators. In the flickering firelight of Stone Age caves, imagination carved the first chapters of human history, whispering across time that even in darkness, even in fear, the human spirit could create beauty. Those painted walls were both memory and promise, saying, "We are more than our hunger, more than our fear. We dream, we imagine, we endure." When darkness swallowed the land and the cold pressed close, fire became more than warmth. Around its glow, voices rose, weaving threads of memory and fantasy into the first myths. Here, in the circle of light, where sparks floated like stars and shadows loomed like giants, our ancestors created stories that explained the unexplainable, comforted the fearful, and bound the tribe together. These myths were not written nor preserved on stone. They lived in the breath of elders, carried across generations, shifting with each retelling. Fire, in its flickering rhythm, became the first storyteller, and humans became listeners, dreamers, and believers. The earliest myths often answered questions that burned in every heart. Where did we come from? Why do the stars shine? Why must we die? Around the fire, elders invented answers with a mixture of memory, imagination, and fear. One story might claim that humans were born from the belly of a great mountain, crawling out like sparks from stone. Another might explain that the sun was a blazing beast, hunted across the sky each day, bleeding light until darkness reclaimed it. In these myths, imagination bridged the gap between ignorance and wonder, giving form to mysteries too vast for silence. The myths also reflected the dangers of their world. To explain thunder, cavemen might speak of a giant spirit striking the sky with its club. To explain earthquakes, they imagined a beast stirring in the depths of the earth. Each myth turned fear into story, transforming terror into something that could be shared, laughed at, or revered. A storm was less frightening when understood as a quarrel between gods. Death was less cruel when framed as a journey into another realm. Through myths, imagination softened the sharp edges of reality, replacing dread with meaning. These myths were not told in stillness, but with performance. Elders spoke with booming voices, rising to their feet, arms spread wide as they mimicked animals or gods. Firelight exaggerated their movements, casting gigantic shadows onto the walls, turning their bodies into living spirits. Children gasped when a storyteller imitated the roar of a lion, or when sparks were flung into the air to mimic stars. Each gesture, each word carried power, for storytelling was both entertainment and ritual. To tell a myth was to shape belief, to guide hearts, to stir courage. Around the fire, imagination became theater, binding the tribe in shared wonder. The first myths also taught lessons. A tale of a hunter who angered the spirits by wasting meat reminded listeners to respect their prey. A story of siblings who fought until the tribe fell into ruin warned against jealousy. Through these narratives, morality was born not in rules etched on stone tablets, but in stories whispered into smoke. Children learned to be brave, to be kind, to obey elders, to cherish family. Myths were not only explanations of the world, but blueprints for survival, shaping behavior as much as belief. But myths were not only spoken by elders. Children, too, added their voices. They imagined creatures with wings of stone or rivers that sang in the night. Their simple inventions often grew into legends, retold by adults. Imagination was not confined to the wise, but flowed through all, reshaping myths with each telling. No story was fixed. Like the fire itself, myths flickered, changing shape, yet always glowing with meaning. In this way, myths became both personal and collective, woven from countless voices across generations. One of the most powerful myths concerned ancestors. Cavemen believed that the dead did not vanish but lingered, watching from shadows or stars. Around the fire, they told stories of ancestors who guided hunts, protected children, or punished the wicked. The crackling of flames was often said to be the voices of the dead, whispering advice or warning. In these myths, imagination preserved memory, ensuring that no elder was truly lost. Death became transformation, not oblivion, and the fire became a bridge between the living and the dead. Another recurring myth was of transformation itself. Storytellers described men who turned into wolves, women who became rivers, children who grew into stars. These tales reflected the porous boundaries of early imagination, where human and nature were not separate but one. To become an animal was not fantasy but possibility, a way of explaining instincts, dreams, or desires. Transformation myths revealed the deep bond cavemen felt with their world, seeing themselves not as masters of nature, but as part of its great, shifting story. Fire myths, too, held special power. To many tribes, fire was not merely stolen from wood. One story might tell of a brave bird that carried a spark in its beak from the sun to the earth. Another might claim that a mischievous trickster stole fire from giants, hiding it in his chest until it could be shared with humans. These myths made fire sacred, a reminder of divine generosity or daring courage. To gather around fire was to honor its mythical origins, to keep alive the memory of how humanity first claimed light. In time, these myths grew richer, blending dreams, fears, and hopes into elaborate narratives. Hunters returning from distant journeys added new creatures to the stories. Mothers, calming children, invented gentle spirits who watched over sleep. Warriors created tales of gods who demanded bravery and strength. Each edition deepened the web of myth, turning the fire circle into a library without walls, where every night new chapters were added to the human story. Through these myths, imagination reached beyond survival into culture, weaving identity and belonging. The impact of these myths was profound. They shaped not only belief but perception. A child raised to believe the stars were ancestors would gaze at the night sky with reverence. A hunter who thought thunder was a god's anger would crouch in humility during storms. Myths colored reality, making the world richer, more meaningful, more alive. This blending of imagination and existence was humanity's first philosophy, the earliest step toward religion, art, and science. Myths taught that life was not random but purposeful, guided by forces unseen yet deeply felt. And so, night after night, myths grew. Fires burned, voices rose, shadows danced. Children dozed against their mother's sides, their dreams merging with the stories. Elders leaned close to one another, debating the meaning of a spirit's words. Hunters stared into flames, seeing in them the shapes of their prey, their fears, their gods. The fire became the cradle of imagination, a glowing heart where humanity discovered its voice. Around it, we did not merely survive, we dreamed, we explained, we believed. And in those myths, the seeds of every future story, every religion, every philosophy were sown. When imagination leaped beyond the hunt and the fire, it sought something greater, patterns, meanings, and symbols that could give structure to the mysteries of existence. In this leap, belief was born not yet religion as we know it, but a raw and fluid sense that unseen spirits moved through every rock, every river, every flicker of flame. These early beliefs were not written down nor tied to temples, but lived in whispers, gestures, and marks scratched into stone. They were fragile as smoke and yet enduring as mountains, passed from one generation to the next through symbols and rituals. The tribe began to live not only in the physical world, but in a second, invisible realm shaped by imagination. Symbols were the first bridges into that unseen world. On cave walls and carved into bone, patterns emerged: spirals, circles, zigzags, dots aligned in clusters. At first, these may have been idle marks made by children or absent-minded hunters, but over time they gathered meaning. A spiral came to represent the endless cycle of birth and death. A circle might symbolize the sun or the moon. Dots arranged in lines reflected the stars scattered across the sky. These marks became more than decoration. They became containers of thought, physical signs of invisible ideas. For the first time, imagination had a code, a way to preserve meaning outside the fleeting breath of speech. Spirits, too, filled this expanding realm of belief. Cavemen began to sense presence in the world around them, an energy that could not be seen but could be felt. A whisper of wind through the trees became the voice of an ancestor. The roar of a waterfall was the growl of a hidden guardian. Shadows in the night seemed alive, shaped not only by firelight, but by something watching, waiting. To live in this world was to live surrounded by unseen companion spirits of animals, spirits of the hunt, spirits of rivers and storms. Fear and respect intertwined, for these spirits could bless or punish, depending on how humans treated them. Rituals grew naturally from these beliefs. Before a hunt, the tribe might gather to chant, stamping feet in rhythm, shaking bones filled with pebbles to mimic the sound of hooves. They painted spears on walls and whispered to the spirits of animals, promising not to waste their flesh. After a successful hunt, they returned to the fire with offerings, burning fat or leaving bones in hidden corners of the cave. Gifts for the unseen beings who had allowed the kill. Through ritual, imagination was given form, belief made tangible. These gestures reassured the tribe that they were not alone, that the world was not chaos, but conversation between human and spirit. The birth of belief also reshaped how cavemen thought about death. No longer was it a silent ending, a body fading into earth. With imagination, death became a passage. Graves from this time reveal careful burials, bodies laid in fetal positions as though returning to a womb, sprinkled with red ochre, the color of blood and life, surrounded by tools, beads, and weapons, gifts for a journey beyond. Such practices reveal that cavemen believed death opened into another realm where the spirit continued to live. This belief offered comfort in grief, a promise that loved ones were not lost but transformed. It also strengthened social bonds, for ancestors were seen as active members of the tribe, watching, guiding, and judging from the other side. Symbols deepened this belief in unseen order. Carvings of animals with human faces suggested that spirits could take many forms, blurring boundaries between man and beast. A deer etched with exaggerated antlers might represent a spirit of fertility, while a bird painted near a burial site could symbolize the soul's flight. Over time, these symbols accumulated layers of meaning, carrying myths and memories within their shapes. To see such a symbol was to recall not only a creature, but a story, a ritual, a teaching. Symbols became the seeds of religion, the roots of writing, the first human attempt to make the invisible visible. The imagination of belief also created rules. Spirits demanded respect, and myths taught the price of disobedience. To break a taboo, wasting meat, harming kin, desecrating a sacred place, was to risk angering the unseen. Such rules were not enforced by warriors or chiefs, but by fear of spirits. Children obeyed because they believed eyes watched from shadows. Hunters acted with restraint because they feared punishment from beyond. In this way, belief guided behavior, creating morality long before laws were carved in stone. The tribe lived within an invisible order, shaped by imagination, but powerful as any spear. The emergence of belief also gave rise to early specialists, those who claimed to see deeper into the spirit world. These were the shamans, figures who combined imagination, performance, and ritual into a role of power. Through trance, dance, or the beating of drums, shamans claimed to travel beyond the body, speaking with spirits, healing the sick, or guiding the dead. Their masks, carved from wood or bone, transformed them into creatures of both worlds, half human, half spirit. Whether through genuine visions or theatrical performance, shamans embodied the tribe's imagination, channeling belief into living form. Their presence reinforced the tribe's conviction that the spirit world was real, close, and demanding. At the heart of all this was the fire, still the axis around which imagination spun. Flames became more than light. They were spirits themselves, devouring wood yet giving warmth, fragile yet eternal. To feed the fire was to feed the spirits. To let it die was to risk their anger. Around it, stories grew more elaborate, rituals more complex, symbols more numerous. Belief was no longer scattered, but woven into a fabric of meaning, a worldview that united nature, spirit, and human life into one. The tribe no longer wandered blindly in a world of chaos. They walked in a cosmos, alive with purpose, shaped by imagination, ruled by belief. That this transformation, subtle yet profound, marked a turning point in human history. With symbols, spirits, and belief, humanity began to live in two worlds at once, the physical and the imagined. A boulder was not just a boulder, it was a guardian. A storm was not mere weather, it was a voice. Death was not an end, but a passage. Every action carried weight, not only for survival, but for meaning. Imagination had taken root so deeply that it redefined existence itself. And from this soil, religion, art, and philosophy would one day grow. The rise of belief also ensured that imagination would never die. Stories might change, symbols might shift, but the hunger for meaning endured. Children would always ask why the stars shone, and elders would always answer with myths. Spirits would always linger in forests and rivers, and rituals would always attempt to appease them. In this way, belief carried humanity forward, binding generations in shared wonder. And though thousands of years would pass, though civilizations would rise and fall, the spark born around those first fires would never fade. It still burns in the stories we tell today, in the symbols we cherish, in the faiths we follow. The imagination of caveman was the first foundation of the human soul. Belief brought meaning, but with it came shadow superstitions that clung to every gesture, every sound, every flicker of firelight. Imagination, once a source of comfort, now also whispered fear into the hearts of early humans. Around them, the world was alive with spirits, and each rustling branch, each shifting shadow, each echo in the cave could be a sign of danger. This constant awareness created a life both rich with wonder and heavy with dread. For cavemen, superstition was not foolishness, it was survival, a way to navigate a world where anything unexplained might conceal peril. The seeds of superstition grew naturally from patterns. If a hunter sharpened his spear before dawn and returned with prey, the act itself gained power in memory. The next time, others copied him, believing the ritual to be the cause of success. A child who wore a carved stone around her neck and survived illness inspired others to create amulets, believing the charm held protective power. From such moments, superstitions multiplied. Never step on the ashes of the fire. Never whistle at night. Never eat the heart of a wolf unless you want its spirit to haunt you. These rules, though invisible, became as binding as the laws of nature, shaping daily life with constant caution. Fear sharpened these beliefs. Thunder, once merely a distant roar, became the anger of a spirit demanding respect. A sudden illness was not seen as chance, but as punishment for broken taboos. Even accidents were explained through superstition. A fall meant you had offended the ground. A broken spear meant the forest spirit rejected your hunt. In this way, imagination transformed randomness into purpose, but purpose often born of fear. To exist was to move carefully, to respect unseen rules, to avoid provoking invisible forces. Superstition became a second skin, worn by every member of the tribe. The tribe's rituals grew increasingly elaborate in response to this fear. Hunters smeared blood on their foreheads before leaving, believing it hid them from hostile spirits. Mothers tied shells around children's wrists, convinced the sound would ward off sickness. Fires were never allowed to die completely, for to let them extinguish was to invite darkness, not just physical, but spiritual. Before crossing rivers, people spoke aloud to the water, apologizing for disturbing it. Each act of superstition was both prayer and protection, binding the tribe in constant negotiation with the unseen. Though the spirits could never be proven, their influence was undeniable, shaping behavior as surely as hunger or weather. Superstition also deepened division between tribes. When illness struck or game vanished, suspicion often fell on outsiders. Foreigners were said to carry dangerous spirits, their very presence a curse. Stories told of rival tribes who bewitched prey, causing it to vanish from the forests. Such beliefs fueled conflict, justifying raids and mistrust. In this way, superstition not only bound tribes together, but also pushed them apart, creating walls of fear where bridges might have been built. The imagination that once united people in shared myth now also separated them with suspicion and dread. Yet superstition was not always paralyzing. Sometimes it offered courage. A warrior who believed a carved tooth protected him entered battle with greater confidence. A mother who trusted a charm around her child's neck slept more peacefully. Superstition, even when rooted in fear, gave humans tools to face the unknown. Whether or not the spirits were real, the belief in them was powerful, steadying hearts in a world of uncertainty. Imagination gave shape to fear, and in shaping it, made it bearable. In this sense, superstition was not only burden, but balm, both weight and shield. Nighttime magnified these fears. When the fire burned low and shadows crept closer, every sound became a potential omen. The hoot of an owl was not simply a bird, but a messenger of death. The snapping of a twig outside the cave might be a spirit prowling. Even dreams were suspect visions of falling, of fire, of teeth, were seen as warnings from beyond. Some tribes placed charms at the mouths of caves to keep nightmares out, while others drew symbols on sleeping skins, hoping to protect the soul while it wandered in dreams. To sleep was not mere rest, but a dangerous journey through unseen worlds, where imagination blurred into terror. Children absorbed these fears quickly. They were taught not to speak certain words at night, not to whistle, not to stare too long into firelight lest spirits emerge from the flames. They learned to carry stones, bones, or feathers as constant protection. Through such lessons, superstition passed from one generation to the next, ensuring that fear was never forgotten. And yet, children also invented new superstitions, weaving their own games into belief, counting stars before sleep, avoiding cracks in cave walls, whispering to insects. Imagination did not stagnate, but continually created fresh fears and rituals, a cycle that spun endlessly forward. The power of superstition lay not in truth, but in faith. To believe was to act, and to act was to shape reality. A hunter who hesitated because of a bad omen might miss his chance at prey. A woman who avoided certain berries because of a story might save herself from poison. Even false beliefs sometimes led to real survival. The tribe, guided by superstition, learned caution, patience, and respect for the unknown. Fear was heavy, but it was also protective, keeping humans alive in a world where danger lurked everywhere. Still, superstition carried a darker cost. When disaster struck, famine, plague, or storm, someone had to be blamed. Too often it was the weak, the strange, or the different. Old women accused of angering spirits, children blamed for breaking taboos, outsiders accused of curses. All suffered under the weight of fear. Imagination, once a gift, became a weapon, turning suspicion into cruelty. In this way, superstition foreshadowed the darker chapters of human history, where belief in unseen forces would lead not only to comfort, but to persecution. Fear, once survival, became power, shaping hierarchies and punishment. And yet, despite its shadows, superstition revealed a profound truth. Humanity could not bear a meaningless world. Even in terror, people preferred to believe in spirits and omens rather than chaos. To imagine that thunder was anger, that illness was punishment, that dreams were warnings, was to believe life carried meaning. Fear became proof of imagination's strength, evidence that humans were not content to exist blindly. They sought explanation, order, story, even when it frightened them. Superstition was the price of meaning, the shadow cast by the light of belief. So, in the flickering firelight, as chants rose and charms rattled, superstition wove itself into the fabric of life. Every act, every breath carried unseen weight. The tribe lived not only with hunger and cold, but with invisible rules etched in imagination. It was both prison and protection, curse and blessing. And though centuries would pass, though civilizations would rise, superstition would never vanish. It would change its symbols, wear new masks, speak new languages, but it would endure. For it was born not of ignorance, but of the deepest human need to find meaning in fear, to see order in chaos, to imagine a world where nothing happened without reason. The fire was not only warmth, not only light, it was a library without walls, a place where memory was guarded and gifted. Around its glow, night after night, cavemen learned the greatest tool of survival beyond stone and spear: storytelling. This was not entertainment alone, but legacy, a thread binding generations, ensuring that knowledge, belief, and identity would not vanish into the silence of time. Without writing, without carvings that could hold entire tales, words spoken into smoke became the vessels of history. Each story carried the tribe forward, weaving imagination into survival and turning memory into destiny. Storytelling began with elders. They were the living archives, holding in their minds the hunts of long ago, the names of ancestors, the moments when storms broke or rivers flooded. When they spoke, the tribe leaned in, for these words were both map and compass. A tale of where the mammoths once gathered could save the hunters from starvation. A story of how a river once swallowed careless children reminded the young to respect its current. In this way, imagination preserved not only myths but practical knowledge, turning experience into inheritance. Elders became bridges between past and future, and their stories were the stones beneath every step. Yet stories were never static. Each telling reshaped them, colored by the mood of the teller, the needs of the moment, the fears of the listeners. A hunt told one night as triumph might, in another season of hunger, be retold as warning. A myth of spirits might grow darker after illness swept through the tribe. Children listening wide-eyed today would retell the same tale tomorrow with their own embellishments, adding creatures or omens born of dreams. Storytelling was alive, constantly reborn, as fluid as the flames around which it grew. In this fluidity lay its power, adapting imagination to the needs of each generation. Performance was central to these legacies. Storytellers did not merely speak, they embodied their tales. They crouched low, mimicking the stalk of a hunter. They roared like lions, bellowed like mammoths, hissed like snakes. Their arms spread wide to become wings, their shadows stretching across cave walls, larger than life. The fire transformed their bodies into spirits, their gestures into myths. Children gasped and clung to their mothers. Hunters nodded in recognition. Women laughed with delight. Storytelling was not passive, but communal, a performance shared by all, where audience and teller breathed the same imagination. In these moments, the tribe became one, bound by words, shadows, and wonder. But storytelling was more than memory, more than theater. It was identity. Through tales, the tribe defined who they were. They were not merely hunters and gatherers, but children of the mountain, kin of the river, chosen of the spirits. They were descendants of a mythical ancestor who once fought giants, or siblings of the sun and moon who watched over them. Storytelling turned scattered lives into a narrative, a meaning greater than hunger and survival. To belong to the tribe was to inherit its stories, to carry its myths in your heart. Without stories, one was rootless, forgotten, nameless. With them, one was eternal. Children were always the heart of this legacy. They listened with wide eyes, their imaginations soaking in every word. They repeated fragments in their play, pretending to be hunters or spirits, mimicking elders with clumsy gestures. In these games, stories lived on, reshaped for the next generation. Elders watched with pride, knowing that their voices would outlast them, carried in the laughter of children who would one day sit by fires of their own. In this way, storytelling defied death. Though bodies crumbled, voices endured. To die was not to vanish, but to live on in stories, whispered long after the speaker was gone. Storytelling also gave hope. When hunger gnawed or storms raged, stories reminded the tribe of endurance. Tales of past famines survived, of hunts won against impossible odds, gave courage to the weary. Stories of ancestors who braved mountains or fought spirits promised that the tribe, too, could survive their trials. Even myths of gods and spirits, though wrapped in fear, carried reassurance that the world was not chaos but order, guided by unseen hands. In storytelling, imagination turned despair into determination, transforming suffering into lessons, loss into memory, survival into meaning. The role of storytellers grew sacred. Some became known not only as hunters or mothers, but as keepers of words. They carried chants, myths, and histories in their minds with precision, correcting others when details slipped, reminding listeners of forgotten lines. These keepers became revered, for they ensured that no story was lost. In their voices lived generations, their breath the only parchment, their memory the only ink. To listen to them was to touch the past. To learn from them was to shape the future. The tribe depended not only on spears for survival, but on stories, for without them, knowledge faded like smoke. Over time, stories stretched beyond the tribe itself, connecting people to the wider world. Hunters who traveled far brought back new tales of distant rivers, of mountains that touched the sky, of animals unknown. These stories expanded imagination, showing that the world was larger than the familiar valley or forest. They also inspired myths, for what was strange soon became sacred. A beast glimpsed on the horizon might become a spirit in the next tale. A new mountain might be said to house gods. Through stories, imagination stitched together a map far larger than any one tribe could explore, creating a world as infinite as words could paint. The legacy of storytelling was not only survival, not only identity, but art. Beyond teaching and warning, stories became entertainment, woven for delight as much as necessity. Children begged for favorite tales, laughing at tricksters, marveling at heroes, shivering at monsters. Even in hardship, even in fear, humans found joy in the rhythm of words, in the music of imagination. This joy was itself a survival, a flame within the heart, a reminder that life was not only burden but wonder. Through storytelling, humanity learned not just to endure but to celebrate, to find light even in the darkest cave. And so, night after night, stories rose with the smoke drifting into the stars. They did not die when the fire faded, nor when the storyteller's voice grew silent. They lived in memory, in repetition, in the breath of each listener who became tomorrow's teller. Storytelling was the first immortality, the earliest form of writing, not on stone but in minds, passed from mouth to ear, ear to heart, heart to tongue. Through it, imagination became eternal. And humanity's legacy began not carved in monuments, not etched in tablets, but spoken in the humble glow of firelight. The world of the caveman was never still. For thousands of years, they roamed across valleys, mountains, and forests, their lives carried by the rhythm of animals and seasons. Yet slowly, almost imperceptibly, change began to stir. The same fire that once gave warmth in caves, the same stones that once shaped spears, the same hands that painted walls with ochre and charcoal. These tools of survival would now push humanity toward something greater: settlement. From the dark hollows of caves, they stepped into a new dawn, where permanence replaced wandering, where memory took root in earth, and where civilization's story began. The earliest shift was subtle. It started when tribes discovered places where food was abundant year after year, rivers that teemed with fish, valleys that burst with berries, meadows where herds returned season after season. Instead of chasing prey endlessly, families lingered. They built simple shelters from branches, hides, and mud. At first, these were temporary, meant only for weeks or months. But as seasons turned and resources remained steady, those shelters grew sturdier. A cave had once been their fortress, but now they shaped their own walls, their own protection. The idea of home, no longer dictated by nature, was born from human hands. Fire, once a tool for warmth and safety, became a center of permanence. Where fire burned daily, ash gathered, and around those ashes, the first villages slowly formed. Families arranged huts in circles, mimicking the campfires of their past. The fire was no longer only survival. It became a symbol of community. Children laughed and played around it. Mothers cooked roots and meat upon it, and elders told stories by its glow. Unlike caves, which belonged to the earth, these fires belonged to them. With every flame kindled in the open, humanity claimed its own space against wilderness. Another shift came with seeds. At first, they did not understand the magic of plants, only that grains fell and sometimes sprouted again. But when families returned to the same meadow and found familiar foods growing where they had camped before, curiosity turned into observation. Soon they began scattering seeds deliberately, watching them sprout, tending them with care. The hunter's spear was slowly joined by the gatherer's handhoe, carved from bone or stone. Farming was fragile, unreliable in its infancy. But it planted more than crops. It planted the idea of control over the land, of humans shaping nature rather than merely obeying it. Domestication followed. Wolves, once howling threats in the night, grew curious around human camps. Drawn by scraps of food and warmth, they lingered. Some were tolerated, then befriended. In time, loyalty was born. And wolves became dogs, the first companions, guardians, and hunting partners. Goats and sheep were cornered, kept bred. From wild herds, they became property. This was revolutionary, for it meant that food no longer had to be chased endlessly. It could be tended, grown, sustained. The cave had been shelter. The settlement was sustenance. Humanity's relationship with animals and plants transformed. binding their futures together. With these changes, life itself began to feel different. No longer did families live with the constant fear of losing everything in a single storm or hunt. Stability, though fragile, brought rhythm. Days were marked not only by sunrise and hunger, but by tasks, tending fires, watching flocks, planting seeds, shaping huts. The rhythm of seasons became calendars, guiding when to plant and when to harvest. For the first time, time itself was not only endured but measured, anticipated, prepared for. Memory lengthened, and imagination stretched further, toward a future more predictable than the endless chase of nomadic life. This stability reshaped society. In caves, leadership had often been fluid. Hunters led hunts, elders told stories, mothers guarded children. But in settlements, new roles emerged. Some became skilled in shaping tools, others in taming animals, others in growing plants. Knowledge became specialized, and with it came new respect and sometimes new conflict. The tribe was no longer just a wandering family, but a community with roles, responsibilities, and beginnings of hierarchy. Leadership shifted from survival alone to management of land, people, and resources. Civilization was stirring in the soil, in the seeds, in the bones of huts. Settlements also deepened imagination, with walls that stood year after year, with fields that sprouted anew each season. Humans began to think not only of today, but of tomorrow. The permanence of place encouraged permanence of thought. Caves once held paintings of hunts. Now, huts bore carvings and decorations that spoke of identity. Clay figurines, etched stones, woven fibers, art grew alongside settlement, each piece carrying meaning beyond function. Where the cave's darkness had been canvassed for dreams, the open village became a gallery of imagination. Humanity was not only surviving, it was creating. Yet settlement was not without cost. Disease, once dispersed by wandering, now spread easily among clustered families. Waste, once left behind in endless roaming, accumulated in camps. Hunger struck harder when crops failed, for mobility had been traded for permanence. And enemies, once avoided by moving, now found targets fixed in place. Settlements brought security, but also vulnerability. The first wars, the first raids, the first thefts of stored grain or animals, all were born from this new way of life. Civilization carried both promise and peril, progress and pain. Despite hardships, the roots of settlement deepened. Families buried their dead nearby, marking graves with stones or mounds. Unlike caves, where bones were often scattered and forgotten, settlements tied the living to the land of their ancestors. Memory became anchored not only in stories, but in soil. A child could stand by a grave and know where they came from, who they belonged to. This connection created identity stronger than any wandering band could hold. A place became sacred, and with it, a sense of belonging that went beyond survival. It was heritage. Storytelling changed too. Around fires in caves, stories had been ephemeral, rising with smoke into the night. But in settlements, they became traditions tied to place. Myths grew around rivers, mountains, fields, and ancestors buried in the earth. Spirits no longer lived only in storms and beasts, but in the very soil humans cultivated. Rituals emerged to bless crops, to guard animals, to honor ancestors. Imagination fused with land, and belief systems sprouted alongside seeds. These were the first roots of religion, the first sense of humans not just surviving in nature, but partnering with it, pleading with it, shaping it with ritual as generations passed. Children grew up not knowing only caves and endless trails, but homes, fields, and communities. Their laughter echoed in courtyards. Their hands learned to plant before they learned to hunt. Their memories tied not to the chase, but to the harvest. For them, settlement was not a strange experiment, but the only world they knew. The story of humanity was changing irrevocably. From stone and fire, it now included earth and seed, hut and hearth. The caveman was fading, and the settler was rising. Thus, from caves to settlements, the greatest transformation of early humanity unfolded. It was not swift nor universal, but gradual, scattered, fragile. Yet it carried within it the seeds of everything to come: villages, cities, kingdoms, civilizations. In shaping their own shelters, their own fields, their own communities, humans stepped across a threshold that would never be crossed back. The cave had given birth to imagination. The settlement gave birth to civilization. And from this foundation, history itself would grow. The step from settlement to village was not a sudden leap, but a quiet unfolding, like a seed turning into a tree. At first, a few huts clustered near a river or plain, their smoke curling upward, their footprints worn into earth. Families built close to one another for safety, for warmth, for sharing. But as the years passed, one hut became 5, then 10, then more, until what had once been a campsite transformed into something greater: a village. And within these early clusters of homes, humanity learned a new truth. Survival was no longer only about individual strength, but about cooperation, about the weaving together of many lives into one shared story. The earliest villages were small, fragile things. Their huts were not grand stone walls or towering structures, but simple circles of wood, reed, and clay, patched with hides. Each hut was a family's world, yet no family stood alone. Paths formed between huts, well-trodden by bare feet. Central fires burned constantly, tended not by one, but by many, for the flame was now the heart of the whole community. Around it, people gathered not only to eat and tell stories, but to plan. Where once a hunt had been a brief and chaotic pursuit, now strategy became collective. Decisions of when to plant, where to fish, how to store food, these were made together, shaped by voices rising and blending like the smoke above. Storage itself was a revolution. Instead of devouring every morsel of food before it spoiled, villagers dug pits lined with stone or clay, storing grains and dried meat. Clay pots hardened in fire held seeds for the next planting, water for drought, and berries for lean months. With storage came security, but also responsibility. No longer could one family hoard or another take freely without consequence. Rules were whispered, then spoken, then remembered. Share in times of plenty, support in times of need. Cooperation was not kindness alone. It was survival. The village thrived because each member understood that their fate was bound to the rest. The presence of many families together reshaped daily life. Children, once raised almost solely by mothers and close kin, now belonged to the entire village. They played together, learned together, watched hunts and harvests side by side. An elder's story, told by the fire, was not just for his own blood, but for every child who sat listening with wide eyes. Knowledge of tools, of seasons, shared across families, ensuring no skill or wisdom died with a single person. In this way, cooperation became inheritance, a safety net woven by countless hands. Villages also demanded new structures of order. In caves, conflicts could be settled by distance. Families that clashed could move apart. But in villages, permanence forced resolution. Disputes over food, over animals, over water could no longer be ignored. Elders became mediators, respected for their memory and fairness. Leadership began to stretch beyond hunting and survival into judgment, into governance. Laws, though unwritten, began to take shape in memory and ritual. Rules about when to plant, who could claim a field, how to punish theft. These laws were fragile, enforced not by prisons or weapons, but by community itself, by the fear of shame and exclusion. To be cast out of the village was worse than hunger. It was the death of belonging. The growth of villages also fostered new bonds between families. Marriages, once a matter of chance encounters in wandering tribes, became alliances binding households together. A union between two families strengthened not only bloodlines but cooperation, ensuring loyalty and support. Feasts were shared. Songs were sung and dances circled the fire as families celebrated these bonds. Villages became webs of kinship with ties of blood and friendship woven tightly. A child's birth was no longer just a family's joy, but the whole village's celebration, for each new life meant continuity, strength, and hope. Work itself evolved into cooperation. Where once a hunter carried his own spear and faced the wilderness with only a few companions, now villagers worked in teams. Men and women alike tilled fields together, gathered reeds for huts, hunted in groups with coordinated strategy. Fishing nets, too heavy for one, were cast by many hands. Clay was shaped into pots by groups, dried in communal fires. The rhythm of life became a rhythm of togetherness, where the effort of one merged seamlessly with the effort of all. The village was a living body, each person a hand or foot, each task a heartbeat. The village also became a crucible of imagination. With many families gathered, songs grew louder, dances more elaborate, stories richer. Rituals once held in the privacy of caves now became public ceremonies. The planting of seeds was marked by chants, the harvest by feasts, the hunt by prayers to spirits. Art bloomed beyond survival. Painted pots, carved totems, woven patterns on mats. Identity was no longer only tied to a single family, but to the village itself. Symbols and traditions formed, uniting everyone under one shared name. To belong to the village was to carry its marks, to know its songs, to honor its dead. But cooperation, though powerful, was not without challenges. Envy stirred when one family's harvest was greater. Suspicion whispered when one hunter's kill seemed too frequent. Fear grew when food ran low, when disease spread, when strangers approached. Villages demanded trust, yet trust was fragile. To protect it, rituals of sharing and solidarity multiplied. Festivals marked the turning of seasons, reminding everyone that their lives were bound together. Even punishment became ritual, often symbolic rather than brutal. A thief might be shamed, required to work for others, or made to give double what was taken. These customs kept peace where raw instinct might have torn bonds apart. The village also reshaped humanity's relationship with the land. Where once the wilderness was vast and unclaimed, now territories mattered. Fields were planted, rivers fished, animals grazed under watch. To lose land was to lose survival, so boundaries began to form, defended with vigilance. Villages sometimes welcomed neighbors, exchanging gifts and stories, but just as often they clashed. Cooperation within gave rise to competition without. The seeds of future wars were sown here in the soil of the first villages, where cooperation stopped at the boundary of one's own community. Despite conflict, the power of villages was undeniable. They allowed humanity to face hunger with grain, storms with huts, loneliness with belonging. They made survival more than endurance. They made it communal, cultural, emotional. For the first time, life was not merely about living through the day, but about shaping tomorrow. Villages were humanity's first societies, fragile yet powerful, small yet monumental. In them, imagination was not just painted on cave walls, but lived in every shared task, every ritual, every fire that burned at the village's heart. The growth of villages brought abundance, but abundance was never equal. One village near a river might have fish in endless supply, but little grain. Another in a fertile valley might grow rich harvests, but lack flint for sharp tools. A settlement by the mountains might quarry stone, yet go hungry when the herds moved away. This imbalance, born from the land itself, gave rise to one of humanity's most transformative ideas: exchange. Trade began quietly, almost humbly, with gifts offered between neighbors. But soon it grew into a system of survival, of connection, of imagination that stretched beyond the horizon of a single village. The first exchanges were simple. A hunter with more meat than his family could eat gave some to another family in return for hides or stone tools. A gatherer who collected too many berries traded them for fish from the river. These early trades were not measured with weights or numbers, but by instinctive fairness, by the shared sense that one good balanced another. In these moments, trust was the only currency, for no tokens or coins yet existed. A man's word, a woman's gesture, a child's honesty, these were the foundations of the earliest economy. Without trust, trade collapsed. With it, life blossomed soon. Specialization deepened exchange. Some villagers became skilled hunters, others master potters, others tool makers. A man who shaped the sharpest blades could not eat his craft, but his tools were valued by all. He offered them to hunters, receiving meat in return. The potter exchanged vessels for grain. The woman who knew the secrets of herbs traded remedies for hides and milk. In this way, skill itself became wealth, and communities wove themselves into webs of interdependence. No family, no person could survive alone. Trade became the lifeblood of cooperation, flowing through villages like the rivers that nourished them. As villages grew, so too did the scope of exchange. At first, trade was internal, linking family to family within a single settlement. But curiosity and necessity pushed boundaries outward. Families traveled to neighboring villages, bringing with them goods to share. A man carried obsidian blades to a riverside community, returning with dried fish. A woman walked for days with baskets of grain, exchanging them for salt and shells. These journeys were more than barter, they were bridges, stitching together scattered groups into networks of survival. Where once strangers might have been threats, now they became partners. The idea of wealth shifted from what one owned to what one could exchange. These exchanges gave rise to the first hints of culture beyond survival. When a woman returned with shells from a distant shore, they were not eaten but worn, admired, treasured. They became symbols of beauty, of status, of imagination. Trade introduced novelty into daily life, expanding horizons beyond the immediate environment. Villagers learned of mountains they had never seen, rivers they had never crossed, animals they had never hunted. Every exchanged object carried with it a story, a whisper of distant lands. In this way, trade did not only feed the body, but nourished the mind, sparking curiosity and wonder. Yet trade required more than goods, it required language. Simple gestures could serve within a village, but across distance, clarity mattered. Words for numbers, for measures, for value began to form. A word for many, another for few, another for enough. Slowly, the language of barter grew richer, shaping early communication. Language itself evolved alongside trade, giving humans not only the ability to share stories, but to negotiate, to persuade, to promise. The roots of commerce were also the roots of diplomacy, teaching people that survival could be built not only on strength but on agreement. Over time, certain goods became more than practical. They became universal standards. Salt, vital for preserving meat, was precious in every village. Flint and obsidian, sharper than any other stone, were sought across vast distances. Shells, beads, and rare stones became tokens of wealth, their value less in function than in symbolism. These early currencies simplified exchange, allowing strangers to trade without long debate. They marked the dawn of abstract value, of humans agreeing that certain objects could represent worth beyond their physical use. In this step, imagination leaped forward, planting seeds that would one day grow into money, markets, and empires. Trade also transformed relationships between villages. Where once competition for land or food might have led to conflict, now exchange offered peace. Two villages that shared goods became bound by trust, their survival linked. Marriages often followed trade, sealing alliances, weaving bonds between communities. Festivals grew around these exchanges, with dances, songs, and rituals accompanying the barter of goods. The act of trading became not only economic but cultural, a celebration of connection, of shared humanity. Through trade, isolation gave way to networks, and the world grew smaller, more familiar. But trade also brought risks. Strangers carried not only goods, but sickness, ideas, and envy. A village that grew too wealthy might become a target for raids. Greed sometimes soured exchanges, sparking disputes. Trust, though essential, was fragile, and when it broke, the consequences could be dire. Still, even in conflict, the idea of trade endured. People learned that it was often easier to exchange than to fight, more profitable to give than to steal. This lesson, fragile but enduring, was one of humanity's first steps toward diplomacy, toward the recognition that cooperation could stretch across boundaries. Even between those who were not kin, the imagination that trade sparked was transformative. A child who wore a shell necklace brought from far away did not only adorn herself, she carried proof that the world was vast, that beauty and wonder lay beyond the horizon. A pot painted with patterns from another village introduced new art, new symbols, new ways of thinking. Each object carried imagination from one mind to another, from one culture to the next. Through trade, ideas traveled farther than feet, shaping humanity's future in ways no one could yet understand. In the end, the roots of trade and exchange were more than survival. They were the first threads of globalization, stretching across forests and rivers, weaving humanity into a single fabric. Each traded object was not merely a tool or food, but a symbol of trust, of curiosity, of connection. From the first shared hides to the first prized shells, trade became a legacy, as enduring as fire, as transformative as settlement. It carried within it the essence of what it meant to be human, to give, to receive, to imagine a life beyond one's own boundaries. And in this exchange, civilization took another step forward, guided not only by strength, but by cooperation, not only by survival, but by imagination. The transformation from wandering bands to settled villages did more than change where people lived. It reshaped how they thought, how they felt, how they imagined themselves within the world. In the wild, every sunrise had been uncertain. Survival demanded constant movement, constant adaptation. But in a village where fields grew and huts endured, life became more predictable. With predictability came reflection, and with reflection came ritual. These rituals were not idle play, but lifelines of meaning, weaving individuals into communities, anchoring fragile settlements with bonds of belief stronger than stone. The earliest rituals were born from the land itself. When seeds sprouted, villagers saw it as a miracle. They celebrated with chants and dances, stamping feet into the earth as though to awaken it. When rain fell after long droughts, they lifted their hands to the sky, giving thanks to unseen forces. Fire, that ancient companion, still glowed at the center of gatherings, its crackle the heartbeat of the community. Around it, they told stories of ancestors, of animals, of spirits that moved unseen through wind and river. These rituals offered comfort, explaining the unpredictable with symbols, transforming fear into understanding. As villages expanded, rituals became more complex, structured into rhythms that matched the cycles of life. Planting required prayers, harvests demanded festivals, births invited blessings, deaths called for mourning songs. Each event in the human journey became marked with collective acts, drawing individuals into shared identity. No one planted alone, no one mourned alone, no one celebrated alone. Through ritual, the village became more than huts and fields. It became a living organism. Its pulse felt in songs, its breath in chants, its memory in sacred objects passed through generations. Symbols grew in importance. Stones stacked into circles, bones carved into figurines, lines etched into clays were not merely decorations, but vessels of belief. A carved idol stood as a guardian of the fields. A painted pot held not only water, but prayers for abundance. Ritual gave matter new meaning, layering reality with imagination. To touch a sacred stone was to touch more than rock. It was to connect with ancestors, with forces that governed existence. Objects became anchors of memory, making belief tangible, visible, enduring. even when voices fell silent. The roles within rituals reflected and shaped social order. Certain individuals emerged as guides elders who remembered the oldest chants, women who knew the secrets of herbs, men who read patterns in stars or flight of birds. These were the first shamans, priests, healers, figures who bridged the seen and unseen. They carried authority not by strength but by knowledge, their voices guiding ceremonies, their gestures shaping meaning. Villagers turned to them in sickness, in drought, in conflict, believing that they held access to powers beyond ordinary reach. In this way, ritual gave rise to leadership rooted in wisdom. Complementing leadership rooted in strength, ritual also bound villages together across distance. When one community visited another, they did not only trade goods, but shared ceremonies. A visiting family joined in dances. A wandering healer brought new chants. A marriage between villages united gods as well as people. Rituals traveled as surely as goods, spreading ideas of belief across rivers and mountains. Shared symbols smoothed suspicion, turning strangers into allies, weaving distant settlements into cultural networks. In this way, ritual acted as invisible architecture, building bridges of meaning where stone bridges had yet to exist. At the heart of ritual lay emotion. Life in early villages was not easy. Hunger still threatened, storms still destroyed, sickness still claimed lives. Ritual transformed suffering into meaning. A death was not only loss, but passage, a journey to another realm where ancestors waited. A drought was not only despair, but a test, a call to sacrifice, to come together, to hope. Ritual taught people to endure by giving suffering a story, a frame, a shape. In dance and chant, grief was softened, fear was calmed, joy was magnified. Ritual was not escape from life, but the very way life became bearable over time. Rituals grew into festivals, events that marked the rhythm of the year. The harvest festival was perhaps the most significant, when abundance was celebrated with feasts, dances, and offerings. Entire villages gathered, their labor rewarded with joy, their gratitude poured into the earth and sky. At night, fires blazed, drums echoed, bodies painted with ash and clay moved in circles until dawn. These festivals were more than relief. They were declarations of unity, moments when every person, young and old, rich in grain or poor in goods, felt part of something greater than themselves. In that unity, the village discovered its identity. Ritual also gave shape to morality. Through shared stories told during ceremonies, people learned what was right, what was forbidden, what was sacred. A tale of an ancestor who disrespected the river and suffered taught the importance of reverence for water. A chant about animals that gave themselves for food taught gratitude for the hunt. Belief carried law before laws were written, guiding behavior, ensuring harmony. Ritual was not only about gods or spirits, it was about teaching humans how to live together, how to respect one another, how to see themselves as part of a larger world. Yet rituals were never static. Each generation added, altered. A new song arose from a distant visitor. A new gesture emerged from an unusual harvest. A new charm was carved from an unfamiliar stone. Ritual was both memory and creativity, a living practice that carried the past while adapting to the present. This adaptability gave rituals their endurance, allowing them to survive across centuries, across landscapes, shaping cultures long after their origins were forgotten. Even today, echoes of these earliest ceremonies survive in festivals, in songs, in the very human need to gather, to celebrate, to mourn, to believe in the quiet of night. When the village fires burned low and the stars spread wide above, rituals gave people a sense of belonging, not only to the community, but to the cosmos. Looking at the sky, they saw not emptiness, but stories, hunters, animals, ancestors written in light. They sang to those stars, believing they too were part of the ritual of the universe, a small flame within a vast pattern. This cosmic connection gave life grandeur, lifting eyes from fields and huts to infinity, teaching that even the smallest village was woven into the great fabric of existence. Rituals, in their essence, were acts of imagination. They transformed ordinary acts into sacred gestures, ordinary objects into symbols, ordinary time into sacred time. To plant was not only to farm, but to participate in creation. To mourn was not only to grieve, but to guide a soul to eternity. To dance was not only to move, but to echo the rhythms of earth and sky. Through ritual, humans discovered the power to reshape reality with imagination, to build worlds not only of mud and stone, but of meaning, memory, and hope. The story of the first villages is more than a record of huts and harvests. It is the origin of civilization itself. From those fragile settlements of mud and wood emerged the patterns of life that still shape humanity today. The legacy of early villages stretches across millennia, etched not only in the soil where ancient crops once grew, but in the very rhythms of human existence, the way we work, the way we live together, the way we imagine who we are. Without villages, there would have been no towns, no cities, no nations, no histories written on stone or paper. The village was the seed from which the tree of civilization rose. The most enduring legacy was agriculture. By planting seeds and tending fields, villagers anchored themselves to place, creating surplus food that allowed communities to grow larger than ever before. That surplus changed everything. For the first time, not every person needed to hunt or gather. Some could focus on other tasks, making tools, crafting pottery, caring for children, or studying the skies. Specialization blossomed because of agriculture, and specialization gave birth to innovation. Every village was a laboratory of invention, every field a classroom, teaching the lessons of growth, patience, and renewal. But agriculture's legacy was not only material, it was spiritual. Watching seeds sprout taught people about cycles, about death and rebirth, about the power hidden within earth and water. Villagers began to see themselves as part of nature's great rhythm, dependent on soil and sun. This awareness gave rise to reverence for fertility, for rain, for seasons. From these reverences grew myths, gods, and rituals that would later evolve into organized religions. Thus, agriculture shaped not only the stomach, but the soul, not only the field, but the temple. The food that sustained bodies also fed imaginations, creating meaning as vital as bread. Equally vital was cooperation. Life in a village demanded collective effort. Fields required many hands. Huts required shared labor. Protection required unity. In the wilderness, survival had often depended on small kin groups, but in villages, strangers learned to live side by side, bound by necessity into something larger than family. This cooperation left a deep mark on human psychology, teaching the skills of negotiation, compromise, and shared responsibility. It was in villages that humans first learned the art of governance, the subtle balance between individual desire and communal need. Long before kings or parliaments, villagers gathered around fires to decide when to plant, how to divide grain, how to settle disputes. In those gatherings lay the first flickers of politics, the fragile beginnings of law. The social structures born in villages became the foundation of culture. With surplus food and cooperative labor came leisure, and with leisure came creativity. People painted walls, carved figures, composed chants, danced under stars. Art flourished not in the chase but in the pause, not in hunger but in plenty. Every decorated pot, every painted body, every carved idol was a testimony that life was more than survival. These creations carried memory, identity, and imagination forward, transmitting ideas from one generation to the next. The village was not only a place of survival, but a workshop of culture, where humanity discovered the joy of expression. Villages also left the legacy of memory. For the first time, people lived long enough in one place to bury their dead in the soil where they themselves would one day rest. Grave sites became sacred, ancestors became guardians, and land became something more than ground. It became heritage. This rootedness created a sense of belonging stronger than kinship. A field was no longer just soil. It was the labor of fathers, the prayers of mothers, the laughter of children. To leave was to lose not only shelter but identity. This attachment to land would later fuel wars, empires, and nations. But it began with the simple act of planting seeds and burying ancestors in the same earth. Another profound legacy was imagination itself. In caves, imagination had painted animals on walls. In villages, imagination built worlds of gods, spirits, and laws. People began to picture not only survival but destiny, not only life but afterlife, not only community but eternity. They told stories of creation, of heroes, of spirits watching over fields. These stories gave people purpose, turning ordinary existence into part of a larger cosmic drama. Imagination, born of survival, matured into belief systems that shaped civilizations. Egypt, Mesopotamia, India, China, Greece stood on the imaginative foundations laid in forgotten villages. Villages also introduced inequality. Surplus food allowed some families to accumulate more than others. Grain could be stored, land could be claimed, goods could be exchanged unequally. Power shifted, hierarchies emerged, and wealth created divisions. Yet even this inequality was part of the legacy, for it drove the development of governance, law, and resistance. The village was where humanity first tasted both cooperation and conflict, generosity and greed. In this duality lay the seeds of history's struggles, shaping the dramas of kings and revolutions that would follow. The material traces of early villages may have eroded, but their patterns endure. Every modern neighborhood echoes the village square. Every parliament echoes the circle of villagers deciding when to plant. Every religion echoes the first prayers whispered over fields. Every nation echoes the first love of land where ancestors rest. The village lives on in memory, in culture, in imagination, invisible but ever-present, the quiet foundation beneath towering cities, and perhaps the deepest legacy is this. The village taught humanity that it could create worlds, to gather stones and build huts, to dig channels and guide water, to plant seeds and harvest abundance. These acts proved that humans were not merely shaped by the world, but could shape the world themselves. From that realization flowed every city, every empire, every invention. The village was humanity's first declaration of agency, the first proof that imagination and effort could transform existence. That declaration still echoes today in every skyscraper, every bridge, every work of art, every dream of the future. So when we think of early villages, we must not see only mud huts and crude fields. We must see seeds of cities, sparks of culture, whispers of belief, first steps toward civilization. We must see the courage of those who chose to stay, to build, to plant, to hope. Their legacy is not forgotten. It is the very ground beneath our feet, the very structure of our world. To remember them is to remember ourselves.